The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, each passing second drawing closer to the moment when the classroom's energy would shift in ways no one could have anticipated. It was an ordinary Tuesday at Ivywood University, a place known for its prestigious professors and challenging coursework. The professor, Dr. Harrison Mitchell, stood at the front of the room, lecturing with his usual passion about the nuances of history, freedom, and the struggles of marginalized communities. But today, something was different. There was an unspoken tension in the air, a crackling energy that most of the students in the room couldn't quite place. Kenty, a quiet and reserved student, sat near the back of the room, his notebook open in front of him, his pen poised to take notes. He wasn't a standout student in the conventional sense, he wasn't the one who spoke up first or attracted attention for his grades. Instead, he had always been the student who worked in silence, learning in his own way, away from the spotlight. But today was going to be different. Kenty didn't know it yet, but he was about to be thrust into a situation that would challenge everything he had ever believed about himself, and the people around him. Dr. Mitchell paused mid-sentence, his eyes scanning the room, and for a moment, the silence felt deafening. He had been lecturing about the importance of self-education and the concept of liberation, and somehow, in the midst of his passion, his gaze landed on Kenty. "Kenty," Dr. Mitchell called, his voice steady but firm. "What do you think about the concept of self-education? Do you believe it's possible for someone like you, coming from your background, to truly teach themselves everything they need to know about the world?" The question hung in the air like a weight, the entire room holding its breath. Kenty froze. It wasn't that he hadn't heard questions like this before. After all, discussions about race and self-empowerment were common in a class like this. But there was something about the way Dr. Mitchell said it that made it feel like more than just a passing comment. It was as if the professor was daring him, challenging him in a way he hadn't expected. Kenty shifted in his seat, feeling every pair of eyes in the room turn toward him. His palms began to sweat, his heart pounding in his chest. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the air conditioner and the sound of his own breathing. He could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on him. Dr. Mitchell's expression remained unchanged, his eyes locked on Kenty, waiting. And then, in a tone that felt both condescending and curious, he added, "What if I told you, Kenty, that I want you to teach me something? Teach me what it's like to truly learn without the privilege of being able to pay for the finest education. Teach me what it means to navigate the world when the odds are stacked against you." Kenty blinked, unable to process what was happening. He glanced around the room, looking for support, but the students seemed just as confused as he was. Some looked intrigued, others skeptical, but none offered a hint of solidarity. He was alone in this moment. "Go ahead," Dr. Mitchell continued, his voice now a mix of curiosity and challenge. "I'm all ears. Show us what you've got." Kenty's mind raced, his thoughts a blur. He didn't know how to respond. Should he speak about the struggles of growing up in a rough neighborhood? Should he talk about the challenges he faced just to get here, to this university, in this classroom? Should he point out the way he had to work twice as hard to prove himself, merely to be seen as equal? But the words wouldn't come. Not yet. Instead, Kenty stood up slowly, his legs shaky as he made his way to the front of the room. His heart was still pounding, his mind flooded with doubt. He wasn't prepared for this. This wasn't the way he had envisioned his college experience. He had always kept to himself, working quietly, never seeking attention, and now, suddenly, he was expected to teach, to stand in front of everyone and prove something he didn't even fully understand himself. He reached the chalkboard, the tip of the chalk cold against his fingers. Dr. Mitchell's challenge still echoed in his mind. "Teach me, Kenty." But how could he? How could he teach someone who had everything he could never have? Someone who didn't know what it was like to walk through life with the weight of prejudice on your shoulders, to be judged not for your abilities but for the color of your skin? Kenty took a deep breath, steadying himself. He wasn't going to back down. He wouldn't let this moment slip away. Not after everything he had fought for, not after all the times he had been overlooked, ignored, and underestimated. He had earned his place here, and he wasn't going to let anyone take that away from him, not even Dr. Mitchell. Drawing a quick line across the board, Kente wrote, "What is liberation?" The room remained silent, but Kente could feel the shift in energy. The question was simple, but it carried weight. It was a question that had been asked for centuries, a question that people like him had been fighting to answer for generations. Turning to face the class, Kente finally spoke, his voice steady but low at first. Liberation isn't just about knowledge. It's about survival. It's about finding a way to make it through a world that is constantly telling you that you don't belong. It's about teaching yourself when no one else will teach you, when the systems in place are designed to keep you down. His words hung in the air, and for a moment, Kente allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had something to teach. I didn't get here because the system made space for me. I got here because I had to fight for every inch. I had to learn what it meant to be resilient when the world constantly tried to break me down. He paused, looking around the room at the students, all of whom seemed to be hanging on his every word. For the first time in his life, he felt seen. He felt heard. The professor, the students, everyone in the room was finally listening. Education, real education, doesn't come from textbooks alone. It comes from experience, from the hard truths that society refuses to acknowledge. So, when you ask me to teach you something, Dr. Mitchell, I'll teach you this: sometimes, the hardest lessons are the ones you never learned in a classroom. Kente turned back to the chalkboard, writing out the word liberation one more time. As he did, he realized that he wasn't just teaching the class, he was teaching himself. He was liberating himself from the doubt, from the fear that had held him back for so long. When he turned around, the class was silent, but the look on Dr. Mitchell's face was anything but indifferent. There was something new in his eyes, a flicker of respect, maybe even awe. For the first time, Kente felt like he had truly earned his place in this world. "Go ahead," Dr. Mitchell said softly, almost reverently. "Continue." And so, Kente did. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Kente stood at the front of the classroom, the weight of Dr. Mitchell's challenge still hanging heavily in the air. The chalkboard behind him seemed like a symbol of everything he had struggled to achieve, each word, each lesson, a testament to his survival. But as the class began to stir, and Dr. Mitchell nodded in approval, Kente realized that this moment wasn't just about the challenge itself. It was about everything that had led him here, the journey, the sacrifices, and the unspoken burdens he carried. He glanced at the clock. There were still a few minutes left in the class, but Kente felt the need to speak, to share something deeper than just the theory of liberation. He wasn't sure what came over him, but the room felt different now. The air was thick with anticipation. This wasn't just a class anymore, it had become something personal, a revelation of sorts. Kente took a deep breath and turned to the board, erasing what he had written. The chalk scraped against the surface, leaving behind the faint outline of his words. Then, with a steady hand, he wrote, "Who am I?" The question hung in the air like a riddle, one that had plagued him for as long as he could remember. Who was he really? Was he the quiet, reserved student sitting in the back of the room, trying to blend in and avoid attention? Or was he something more, a product of his past, of the struggles that shaped him? Kente looked back at the class, feeling the eyes of his peers on him. Some students still seemed uncertain, unsure of how to react. But there were others, those who had once whispered behind his back, now sitting up straighter, intrigued by the vulnerability he was showing. "I wasn't always this confident," Kente began, his voice low but steady. "I didn't always know who I was, or where I fit in. You see, I come from a place where survival isn't guaranteed. Where every day is a battle, not just for your own future, but for the future of everyone around you." He paused, feeling a lump form in his throat. He had never shared this much of himself before, not with anyone. But now, with the classroom listening intently, he couldn't hold back. I grew up in a neighborhood where the odds were stacked against you from the moment you were born. My mom, she raised me on her own after my dad left when I was just a baby. We didn't have much, never did. My mom worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, just to keep food on the table. I remember waking up early in the morning to the smell of coffee brewing, her getting ready to leave before the sun even came up. She worked hard, and I watched her fight through it all, but I never really understood what she was going through. Kentei's voice faltered for a moment, but he pushed forward, unwilling to let the emotions get the better of him. She didn't have the luxury of time, or the luxury of dreams that weren't centered around surviving. But she always told me, "You're going to make it out. You're going to do more than I ever could." She pushed me to be better, to get an education, to rise above the struggle that defined our lives. He wiped his hand across his face, feeling the tension in his chest, but continued. And when I finally got here, this place, Ivywood University, I thought I had made it. But then, reality hit. The classes were harder than I ever imagined. The students, many of them, they had everything I didn't. They didn't understand what it was like to grow up where I did. To see your friends, your family, get caught up in things they couldn't escape from. To wonder if you were even supposed to be here, in a room full of people who seemed so much more prepared than you. Kentei paused again, looking around the room, meeting the eyes of the students who had been watching him intently. It felt strange, talking about this. But at the same time, it felt necessary, like something he had carried with him for too long needed to be said. I didn't know how to fit in at first. I didn't know how to navigate a world that seemed to favor those who had been born into privilege. I didn't have the perfect GPA, or the fancy extracurriculars that made people stand out here. What I had was grit. What I had was the determination to prove that I belonged, even when the world told me I didn't. I had the kind of education that you don't get from books, but from life itself. Kentei could feel the weight of his words settle over the room, like a blanket of shared understanding. He wasn't just speaking for himself anymore, he was speaking for anyone who had ever felt like they didn't fit in. For anyone who had ever felt like their background defined them more than their abilities. I don't want anyone to think that I'm here because I was lucky, Kentei said, his voice growing stronger. I'm here because I fought for it. Every step, every exam, every single day, I fought for this. And no matter how hard it got, I wasn't going to give up. I wasn't going to let anyone, including myself, tell me that I couldn't be here. He stopped and looked over at Dr. Mitchell, who was silently observing him, his arms crossed. For a brief moment, Kentei wondered if the professor was regretting his challenge, regretting the decision to put him on the spot. But the look on Dr. Mitchell's face told a different story. It wasn't regret, it was curiosity. Respect, even. I guess that's what brought me here today, Kentei continued, turning back to face the class. I'm not just a student here. I'm a survivor. And I'm not ashamed of that. I'm proud of it. There was a long silence, one that felt as though it had been stretched thin by the weight of Kentei's words. He hadn't expected to say so much. Hell, he hadn't planned on saying anything at all. But somehow, in that moment, it all felt like it needed to be said. The tension in the room seemed to dissipate, and Kentei felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. For the first time, he realized that his story wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had ever fought to overcome their circumstances, to rise above the limitations that had been placed on them. And maybe, just maybe, this was his moment to inspire someone else to do the same. Dr. Mitchell, who had been quietly watching the entire time, finally spoke, his voice thoughtful. Kentei, he said slowly, you've just taught us something far more valuable than any textbook could ever offer. It's not about how much we know. It's about what we're willing to do with what we have, and how we use it to help ourselves and others. Kentei looked at the professor, and for the first time, he felt seen. Not just as a student, but as a person, someone whose story had value, whose experiences had something to teach. Thank you, Kentei said quietly, before stepping back from the chalkboard. His heart was still racing, but there was a sense of peace that settled over him. For the first time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The sound of Dr. Mitchell's praise hung in the air like a faint echo, but Kenty couldn't bask in it for long. His heart still pounded in his chest, his mind reeling from the unexpected challenge he had just faced. As he returned to his seat at the back of the classroom, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in him, that something had been ignited. But there was also a deep, unsettling realization lurking beneath the surface: this moment wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. The rest of the class seemed to absorb Kenty's words in a strange silence, as though no one was quite sure how to respond. Some of the students had nodded subtly, perhaps acknowledging what they had just witnessed, but many others continued to scribble in their notebooks, their gazes flickering nervously from Kenty back to Dr. Mitchell. No one said anything for the rest of the class, and by the time the bell rang, there was a sense of unease in the air. Kenty gathered his things quickly, eager to escape the suffocating tension that had settled over the room. As he slipped out of the classroom, he could feel the weight of the stairs following him, even as he tried to act as if nothing had changed. But deep down, he knew it had. The question now was, what would happen next? The hallway was crowded with students rushing to their next classes, the normal hustle and bustle of university life carrying on as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. But for Kenty, everything felt different. His head was spinning, the adrenaline from speaking in front of the class still surging through his veins. He had spoken his truth, revealed a part of himself that most people never saw, but he hadn't expected the aftermath to be so complicated. As Kenty made his way to the exit, he bumped into Sarah, a classmate he'd known for a while. She was one of the few people who had ever really taken the time to talk to him, even though they didn't run in the same social circles. Her warm smile was always a welcome sight, but today, there was something more in her eyes. Something curious. "Hey," Sarah said, slowing her pace to match his. "That was something, wasn't it?" Kenty gave a half-smile. "Yeah. I guess. I mean, you just dropped some truth bombs in there," she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. "I didn't know you had it in you." Kenty laughed, but it was a dry laugh, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Neither did I." Sarah fell in step beside him, her eyes scanning his face for a moment before she spoke again. "You really called him out, huh?" Dr. Mitchell looked like he was stunned. "I don't know," Kenty said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. I had to say it." I don't think he even realized what he was asking. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "He asked me to teach him," Kenty said, shaking his head. "But it wasn't just about teaching him something from the textbook. It felt like he wanted me to teach him about my life. About the things I've been through that he couldn't possibly understand." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I get that. It's like he was asking you to give him a glimpse into your world." "Exactly," Kenty replied, his voice growing more intense. "But here's the thing, I'm not a teacher. I don't have all the answers. I've just been surviving. And the last thing I want is for someone to think that just because I'm here, I've got it all figured out." "Yeah, I get that. But the way you spoke, it was real," Sarah said, her voice softening. "You don't have to have everything figured out to make a difference, Kenty. Sometimes, just being yourself, being honest about where you come from, can teach people more than anything else." Kenty looked at her, appreciating her words but still feeling a knot in his stomach. "I don't know. I feel like I just opened a door I wasn't ready to walk through. What happens if everyone starts looking at me differently now?" Sarah paused before answering, her eyes thoughtful. "It's not about how they look at you. It's about how you look at yourself. Maybe this is your moment to show everyone who you really are, you know. Not just the quiet kid in the back of the class, but the person who has a story to tell." Kenty didn't respond right away. The idea of revealing himself fully was terrifying, but Sarah's words lingered in his mind as he walked out into the chilly spring air. He hadn't realized until now just how much he had been hiding behind the walls he'd built up. But maybe Sarah was right. Maybe this was his chance to be more than just a student. Maybe it was his time to show the world who he really was. As Kentei made his way to his next class, he couldn't shake the feeling that Dr. Mitchell's challenge had set something in motion. He had shared his story, but now it felt like the whole room was waiting for more. What had started as a simple question had snowballed into something much larger, something that Kentei wasn't sure he was ready for. When Kentei walked into his next class, the atmosphere was different. There was an unspoken tension in the air, as if people were still processing what had happened earlier in Dr. Mitchell's class. A few students glanced his way, but none of them said anything. Kentei took his seat at the back again, his mind racing with thoughts of what he had just unleashed. As the class went on, Kentei couldn't help but feel the weight of the eyes on him. Every whisper, every glance, felt like an accusation, like they were waiting for him to say more, to give them something else to chew on. But what else could he say? He had already shared a piece of himself, and he wasn't sure he was ready to expose more just yet. By the end of the day, Kentei felt drained. The events of the morning, the unexpected challenge, the conversation with Sarah, it all had taken a toll on him. He needed to clear his head, to figure out what to do next. But as he walked back to his dorm room, he felt the pressure mounting. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about something much bigger. What was he going to do with this newfound voice? What was he going to say next? Dr. Mitchell had challenged him to teach, to share what it meant to survive, to be resilient. But now Kentei wondered, could he handle the weight of that challenge? Could he truly become the person he was being asked to be? The tension within him continued to grow. But in the back of his mind, there was also a flicker of something else, something that felt like hope. He had spoken his truth today. Maybe, just maybe, it was the first step towards something much greater than he had ever imagined. Kentei couldn't shake the feeling of unease that clung to him as the days passed. The tension that had erupted in Dr. Mitchell's classroom still loomed over him, even though the world around him continued on as usual. The reactions to his words, some subtle, others not so much, had left a mark on him, but he couldn't exactly pinpoint what he was supposed to do with that mark. What did it mean to open up, to share his story, when the consequences were still unfolding? And was he ready for what that would bring? The morning after his class with Dr. Mitchell, Kentei walked into the cafeteria with a knot in his stomach. He had woken up early, thinking maybe he could avoid the inevitable, the whispered conversations and the sideways glances. But it was no use. He saw it as soon as he stepped through the door. Students who had been friendly before now looked at him with a mix of curiosity and hesitation. He could hear snippets of conversations as he passed by, murmurs about the black kid in Dr. Mitchell's class, and how bold he had been. Kentei hated the feeling. He wasn't sure if they saw him as some kind of hero or an anomaly. Either way, it was uncomfortable. All he wanted was to get his breakfast and slip into the background, to fade back into the life he'd known before that fateful moment. But something told him that wasn't going to happen. Not anymore. He grabbed his tray, moving through the line in a blur, barely paying attention to what he was putting on it. His thoughts were consumed by the challenge Dr. Mitchell had issued. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this wasn't just about one conversation or one class, it was about something bigger. Something he hadn't even fully understood yet. As he sat down at his usual spot, Sarah joined him, her tray loaded with food, her face lit up with that same easy smile. She was the one person he didn't mind talking to about all of this. Her calm demeanor always put him at ease. "You all right?" she asked, her tone soft but direct. Kentei didn't answer immediately. He picked at his food, not feeling particularly hungry but not wanting to seem rude. Finally, he sighed and looked up at her. "I don't know, Sarah. It's like everything has changed. I can't even walk through the cafeteria without feeling like everyone's watching me. It's A lot to process. Sarah nodded, her expression understanding. I get it. You shared something really personal in class. People are going to react to that. But you can't let it define you, Kente. You spoke your truth, and that's powerful. They might not know what to do with it, but that's on them, not you. Kente let out a frustrated breath. I know, but it feels like I'm being put under a microscope. Like they're waiting for me to perform, or something. I didn't ask for any of this. Sarah sat back and considered that for a moment. You didn't ask for it, no. But you did give them something. And whether or not they're ready for it, you opened a door. You gave them a glimpse into your world. Maybe they don't get it now, but at least you made them think. He stared at her, the weight of her words settling in slowly. She had a way of putting things into perspective, even when he didn't want to hear it. She was right, of course. He had made them think. That was the point, wasn't it? He hadn't just spoken for himself, he had spoken for everyone who had ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed. But was he ready to carry that weight? Could he really continue teaching in the way Dr. Mitchell had challenged him to? Before he could respond, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, noticing a message from an unknown number. Kente, it's Dr. Mitchell. Can you meet me after class today? Kente stared at the message for a moment, his heart skipping a beat. He wasn't sure what to expect, but something about the tone of the message felt different from the usual, formal notes from professors. There was a certain weight to it, something that suggested the conversation wasn't over. What's up? Sarah asked, noticing the way Kente froze. It's Dr. Mitchell, he said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. He wants to meet after class today. Is everything all right? She asked, her brow furrowing. I don't know, Kente replied, sliding his phone back into his pocket. But I've got a feeling he's going to ask me to do more. And I'm not sure I'm ready for that. Sarah gave him a reassuring look. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for, Kente. But you can't hide forever either. If he wants you to teach, then teach. Just do it in your own way. He nodded, though doubt still lingered in his chest. He wasn't sure how much more of himself he could give, not to Dr. Mitchell, not to his classmates, and certainly not to a system that had already asked so much of him. But there was a part of him that felt like this moment might be a turning point, like something was pushing him forward, whether he was ready for it or not. After breakfast, Kente walked to his next class, his mind heavy with thoughts of Dr. Mitchell's message. The hallways were busy, students chatting in groups, but it all felt distant to Kente, like he was walking through a dream. His thoughts kept circling back to what had happened in that classroom, the challenge, the words, the weight of it all. Class passed in a blur, and before long, it was time for him to meet Dr. Mitchell. Kente walked to the professor's office, the familiar path now feeling like a journey into the unknown. He knocked on the door, feeling his stomach tighten as he waited for Dr. Mitchell's response. Come in, came the professor's voice from inside. Kente opened the door, stepping inside to find Dr. Mitchell sitting at his desk, looking as composed as ever. The professor's office was lined with bookshelves, papers neatly stacked, a sharp contrast to the chaotic feeling swirling in Kente's chest. Sit, Kente, Dr. Mitchell said, motioning to the chair in front of his desk. I'm glad you came. Kente sat, trying to steady his breathing. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he had a feeling it was going to be big. I want to talk about what happened in class, Dr. Mitchell began, folding his hands on the desk. You opened a door, Kente. And now, there's a lot more we need to discuss. Kente's heart skipped. He didn't know what to say, but the words came anyway. I didn't mean to make it a big deal, Kente said, his voice quieter than he intended. I just shared what I thought was important. Dr. Mitchell smiled, but it wasn't a smile of judgment. It was a smile of understanding. I know. And I want to make sure that this conversation goes somewhere meaningful. This is just the beginning, Kenty. What you said in class, it resonated. And I think you have the potential to teach something far more important than a single lesson. Kenty stared at the professor, trying to process his words. Was this it? Was this what he had been waiting for? This isn't just about you teaching others what you know, Dr. Mitchell continued. It's about creating a dialogue, a space where your voice, your perspective, matters. I want to help you take that and turn it into something even bigger. Kenty's mind raced. He had wanted to blend into the background, to escape the scrutiny, but now it seemed like he was being asked to step forward in ways he hadn't anticipated. But the challenge was clear: if he was going to take this on, it couldn't just be about survival anymore. It had to be about something more. He took a deep breath and nodded slowly. Okay, he said. Let's do it. The following weeks passed in a blur. Kenty had agreed to Dr. Mitchell's proposal, though he wasn't entirely sure what he had gotten himself into. Dr. Mitchell had told him that it wasn't about becoming a teacher in the traditional sense, it was about using his experiences to create a deeper, more meaningful conversation. But that didn't make it any easier. Every day, Kenty felt the weight of the commitment pushing down on him. He had never been one for public speaking or leading conversations. In high school, he had always been the quiet kid, the one who faded into the background. Even in college, he rarely sought the spotlight. But Dr. Mitchell's challenge had brought him to the forefront, and now Kenty felt like he was stuck between two worlds, one where he could continue to hide, and the other where he was expected to stand tall and speak out. The pressure was mounting, and Kenty knew it. Every time he walked into Dr. Mitchell's classroom, he could feel the anticipation in the air. The students were watching him now, waiting to see what he would say next, how he would respond to the challenge that had begun with that one simple request: teach me. It was the day before Kenty was supposed to present his first official lesson that the emotional toll truly hit him. He had spent hours trying to prepare, trying to figure out what he could possibly teach that would live up to the expectation, but nothing seemed right. He wanted to talk about the struggles he had faced growing up, about the systemic issues, the biases, the hurdles he'd had to overcome just to make it this far. But it was hard to put those feelings into words. Every time he thought he was ready, the emotions would overwhelm him, and he would retreat into himself. It wasn't until he was sitting alone in his dorm room that he realized what he was truly afraid of. It wasn't the students watching him. It wasn't even Dr. Mitchell's challenge. It was that his story was too personal, too raw, to be shared with anyone. His struggles weren't just part of his past, they were part of who he was. And sharing them felt like stripping away the last layer of armor he had left. That night, he couldn't sleep. His mind raced with thoughts of what he could say, but nothing felt right. How could he explain the anger he sometimes felt, the frustration of always having to prove himself? How could he talk about the guilt he felt when he couldn't protect those he loved, when the world around him seemed so indifferent? It wasn't just a lesson. It was his life on display. When he woke up the next morning, he was exhausted, emotionally drained, but he knew he couldn't back down. This was his chance to make a real difference, to give his classmates something they had never seen before, a perspective that came from lived experience, not textbooks or theories. As Kenty entered the classroom, his stomach twisted in knots. The students were already seated, their eyes flickering toward him as he walked in. Dr. Mitchell was standing at the front of the room, nodding toward him as if to say, "It's your turn now." For a moment, Kenty froze. His throat felt tight, and his palms were sweating. He hadn't prepared a formal presentation, and the notes he had jotted down on his phone felt like scribbles now, irrelevant in the face of the emotions swirling inside him. This wasn't just a lesson. It was a reckoning. He stood at the front of the room, trying to steady his breathing. The silence felt deafening, the weight of the room pressing on him like a physical force. The faces around him were expectant, curious, but also unsure. No one had ever seen him like this before. They had known him as the quiet, reserved student who sat in the back. But today, he wasn't that kid anymore. Today, he was about to open up in a way that he never had before. Dr. Mitchell gave him a small nod, signaling him to begin. Kentei swallowed hard. "I'm not sure where to start," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "But I guess I'll start with what I know. And what I know is that growing up, the world wasn't exactly built for me to succeed. For people like me. And that's not something you can just ignore or brush aside." He paused, feeling the weight of his own words, unsure if they would land with the students in the room. He could feel their gazes on him, waiting for more. He felt like an open wound, exposed and vulnerable, but he pushed forward anyway. "I didn't have the same advantages as some of you," he continued. "I didn't grow up in a neighborhood where everyone was expected to go to college or get a good job. My mom worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on, and I spent most of my childhood wondering if we'd be able to make it through the next day. And every time I tried to speak up about that, about the things I was going through, people just told me to keep my head down and stay in my lane." Kentei could feel the lump in his throat, but he forced himself to keep talking. "The thing is," he said, his voice cracking a bit, "it's hard to keep your head down when the world keeps kicking you in the teeth. It's hard to stay in your lane when the lanes aren't even built for you. I don't expect anyone here to understand what that's like. But I think that's what Dr. Mitchell wanted me to show you. He wanted me to teach you something, and the only thing I know for sure is that survival isn't enough. Surviving is just getting through it. But living, really living, is what matters." He felt the weight of the words settle into the room, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. Kentei's heart was pounding, and his hands were shaking, but he didn't care. The truth had come out, and he couldn't take it back. "And that's what I'm trying to teach you today," he said, finally meeting the eyes of the students in the room. "I'm not a hero. I'm not some extraordinary person. I'm just someone who's had to fight for everything I've got. And maybe that's what I can offer you. Not answers, not solutions, but a glimpse into a world that maybe some of you have never seen. A world where you don't just go to class and hope for the best. A world where you have to fight, every single day, just to stay alive." The room was still, and Kentei wasn't sure what to expect. But something shifted in the air, something subtle, but undeniable. The tension in the room had changed. It wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was something deeper. The students were listening, truly listening, and for the first time, Kentei felt like he wasn't just talking to a room full of strangers. He was speaking to people who were finally beginning to understand. "I don't have all the answers," Kentei finished, his voice quieter now. "But if we don't start talking about this stuff, if we don't start acknowledging that it's not just about us individually, then nothing is ever going to change." The silence in the room was thick. No one spoke, but Kentei could feel the weight of their gazes on him, different now, not as spectators but as fellow human beings. It was a shift he hadn't expected, but one he knew was important. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about all of them, coming together in this moment of raw, vulnerable truth. Finally, Dr. Mitchell broke the silence, his voice soft but strong. "Thank you, Kentei," he said, his eyes meeting Kentei's with a quiet admiration. "That was exactly what we needed to hear." Kentei nodded, his heart still racing but now with a strange sense of relief. He had done it. He had shared his truth. And for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was finally being seen. Kentei walked out of Dr. Mitchell's classroom that day feeling like a different person. The weight that had been pressing down on him for weeks, the pressure of having to share his story and make others understand, had lifted. It wasn't completely gone, but for the first time, he felt like the emotional storm inside him had found some sort of release. The room had been silent for a long time after his speech, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was a reflective one. And as he walked down the hallway, heading back to his dorm, Kentei could feel that shift within himself as well. It wasn't just about the reaction of the class, though that had been important. It was about the fact that he had finally said what had been sitting inside him for so long, and somehow, they had listened. They had heard him. As he pushed open the door to his dorm room, his phone buzzed. He dropped his bag on his bed and pulled it out. It was a message from Sarah. "Hey, how did it go? You okay?" Kentae smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over him. It was moments like this that made everything worth it, having someone who genuinely cared. He quickly typed a reply. "It went better than I expected. I'm not sure what's next, but it feels like something shifted. I don't know if it's just me or if they felt it too, but I think we're finally talking about things that matter." He hit send and sat on his bed, letting himself sink into the quiet of the room. It was a stark contrast to the chaos that had consumed his thoughts leading up to that moment. He was tired, emotionally drained, but there was a deep sense of peace that had settled over him. The next few days were a blur, but they were different from what he had experienced before. It wasn't just the classroom that had changed, it was everything. The looks he received in the cafeteria weren't full of judgment anymore. Instead, students who had once been distant now nodded at him, offering small, almost shy smiles. It was as if they had seen something in him, something more than just a black kid sitting in the back of class. They had seen Kentae as a person with a story, one that was complicated, painful, but also powerful. His classmates began to approach him more often, some with questions, others just wanting to talk. Kentae found himself having conversations that were more meaningful than anything he had experienced before. One afternoon, a student named Brian, who had been silent during the lecture, approached him after class. "Hey, Kentae," Brian said, a bit awkwardly, but there was sincerity in his voice. "I just wanted to say, I never really thought about what you said. About how you've had to fight just to be here. It hit me, man. I don't know how you do it. But I appreciate you speaking up. It really made me think." Kentae nodded, surprised by the genuine respect in Brian's voice. "Thanks," he said, unsure of how to respond. "It's not easy, but sometimes, you just have to say what's on your mind, you know." Brian smiled. "Yeah, I get it. I'll be thinking about it. A lot more, I think." As Kentae walked away from that conversation, he realized that this was what Dr. Mitchell had wanted. It wasn't about making a dramatic statement or having everyone agree with him. It was about planting seeds, about sparking a conversation that went beyond the walls of the classroom and into the lives of the people around him. Every small interaction was a step toward change. Over the next few days, Kentae began to think more about what Dr. Mitchell had said. "This is just the beginning." He didn't know what that meant for him yet, but he felt like he was standing on the edge of something bigger. The room had been silent when he shared his truth, but it wasn't a silence of discomfort. It was a silence of understanding. And with that understanding came a responsibility, one he wasn't sure he was ready for, but one he knew he couldn't ignore. That evening, as Kentae sat in his room reflecting on the events of the past few days, his phone buzzed again. It was another message from Dr. Mitchell. "Kentae, I'd like to meet with you tomorrow. We need to discuss next steps for your project. I think you have the potential to do something powerful with this. Let me know what time works for you." Kentae stared at the message for a few moments, his heart beating a little faster. He wasn't sure what this next step would entail, but something inside him told him it wasn't just another assignment. Dr. Mitchell's words carried weight, and Kentae knew they weren't just about class anymore. This was about his future. The next morning, Kentae met with Dr. Mitchell in his office. It was quiet, the only sound being the faint rustle of papers on Dr. Mitchell's desk as he sorted through his notes. Kentae sat across from him, nervous but curious. "Good to see you, Kentae," Dr. Mitchell said, his voice calm but purposeful. "How are you feeling after your lesson?" Kentae thought about it for a moment before answering. "Honestly, I feel better. It wasn't easy, but I think it needed to be said. And it felt like they heard me. Like they understood, at least a little." Dr. Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. That's exactly the point. You opened up a door. And now, we need to keep it open. What you shared in that classroom isn't just for this one class. It's something that can reach far beyond these walls. You've made an impact already, Kente. And I believe you have the potential to do even more. Kente's heart began to race again, but he didn't let it show. What do you mean? What's next? Dr. Mitchell leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. Next, we work on expanding this conversation. I'd like to help you develop a platform where you can share your experiences, where you can engage with people outside of this class. Whether it's through a blog, a podcast, or something else, you have the ability to inspire change, Kente. I want to help you get there. Kente's mind was spinning. A platform? He hadn't even considered it. But the more he thought about it, the more it felt like the next logical step. Maybe this wasn't just about one conversation or one class. Maybe this was the beginning of something much bigger. He nodded slowly. Okay. Let's do it. Dr. Mitchell smiled, clearly pleased with his response. Great. I'll help you get started. But remember, this is your story, Kente. You're in control of how it's shared. As Kente left Dr. Mitchell's office, his heart was pounding with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. He didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time, he felt like he was on the right track. Whatever came next, he was ready. And for the first time, he wasn't running away from his truth, he was embracing it. The next few days were a blur of preparation. Kente wasn't sure what he was getting himself into, but after his conversation with Dr. Mitchell, he felt a spark of excitement that he hadn't felt in a long time. Dr. Mitchell had laid out a plan for him, a way to share his story beyond the walls of the classroom, to turn this one-off lesson into something that could reach a wider audience. Kente was now facing an opportunity he hadn't expected, and he wasn't sure how to feel about it. Remember, Kente, Dr. Mitchell had said, this isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. Being yourself. People are going to connect with you not because you have all the answers, but because you're willing to be vulnerable, to show them who you really are. The idea of putting himself out there, even more than he already had, was intimidating. But the more Kente thought about it, the more he realized that Dr. Mitchell was right. This wasn't just about talking, it was about creating something meaningful, something that had the potential to make a real impact. That afternoon, after his meeting with Dr. Mitchell, Kente returned to his dorm room. He sat at his desk and stared at the blank page on his laptop screen, feeling the weight of the task ahead of him. He knew that starting was the hardest part. He had the message, but putting it into words that would resonate with others? That was the real challenge. Kente leaned back in his chair, glancing around the room. He had grown accustomed to the quiet, the isolation that came with being a student who often kept to himself. But today, the silence felt different. It was as if the world outside had suddenly opened up to him, and now he was expected to fill that space with something meaningful. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. The memories of his childhood, the struggles, the heartache, the small victories, flashed through his mind. Those moments had shaped him, and they were a part of the story he was about to tell. But telling it wasn't going to be easy. His past wasn't something he liked to revisit. The anger, the frustration, the fear, it all felt like a heavy burden that he had spent so many years trying to forget. But he knew now that he couldn't forget it. He couldn't ignore it. His past was what had brought him here, and if he wanted to make a real difference, he had to face it head-on. He had to share it, even if it scared him. Kente opened his laptop and began typing. The words came slowly at first, but they started to flow as he allowed himself to dig deeper into his memories. He wrote about the days when he and his mother would go without food so they could pay the rent. He wrote about the times he had felt invisible in a world that seemed to have no room for people like him. He wrote about the anger he had felt when others told him to just try harder, when they had no idea how hard he had already tried. The more he wrote, the more he realized that this wasn't just an assignment. This was catharsis. It was a way to release the pain he had been holding onto for years. And in that moment, it wasn't about seeking sympathy or attention. It was about owning his story, and in doing so, giving others the permission to own theirs. By the time Kentei finished the first draft of his blog post, it was late into the evening. He sat back in his chair, staring at the screen, unsure of what to do next. The words on the page felt raw, unpolished, and vulnerable, but they were his. And for the first time, he felt proud of what he had written. He wasn't looking for validation or approval. He was just telling the truth, in the way that felt most authentic to him. The following morning, Kentei sent the draft to Dr. Mitchell for feedback. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he trusted Dr. Mitchell's judgment. He knew that if anyone could help him make this stronger, it was him. Later that afternoon, Dr. Mitchell called him into his office. Kentei entered, feeling the familiar mix of nerves and anticipation. "You've done a great job, Kentei," Dr. Mitchell said, motioning for him to sit. "I've read through your post, and I think it's exactly what we need. It's real, it's raw, and it's unapologetically you. But now comes the next part, the hardest part." Kentei frowned. "What's that?" "Putting it out there," Dr. Mitchell replied, his voice soft but serious. "Once you share this with the world, there's no going back. You can't take it back, and you can't control how people will react. But that's the risk. And it's part of the process." Kentei swallowed, the weight of those words settling on his chest. "I'm not sure I'm ready for all that." Dr. Mitchell smiled. "You don't have to be. But the world needs to hear what you have to say. Your story is important. It has the potential to inspire, to challenge, to make people think in a way they haven't before. And that's the point. You're not just talking about your past, Kentei. You're talking about something bigger. You're talking about a reality that many people don't understand, but that they need to." Kentei took a deep breath, feeling the truth of Dr. Mitchell's words. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't planned on becoming the voice of something so much bigger than himself. But here he was, standing at the edge of a new chapter, unsure but determined. "I'm ready," he said, more to himself than to Dr. Mitchell. "I think I'm ready." Dr. Mitchell nodded, his eyes filled with approval. "Good. So, what's the next step?" Kentei paused, feeling the nerves creep back into his chest. "I'll publish it. I just have to hit send, right?" Dr. Mitchell smiled again. "Exactly." Kentei stood up, his hands shaking as he pulled out his phone. He went to the website where he had decided to post his blog, staring at the screen for a moment before hitting the publish button. As soon as the words were out there, they felt final. The story that had been inside him for so long was no longer his alone. As he hit the button, he took a deep breath, feeling the weight of it all wash over him. He didn't know what was going to happen next. He didn't know who would read it, or how they would react. But in that moment, he realized something important: he had taken control of his own narrative. He wasn't just a passive observer in his own life anymore. He was an active participant, shaping his future one word at a time. As he sat back in the chair, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from Sarah. "I saw your post. Wow, Kentei. Just wow. You're going to change the world, I know it." Kentei smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. Maybe, just maybe, he could. Kentei woke up the next morning with a strange feeling in his chest. It wasn't anxiety, though there was a bit of that lingering in the back of his mind. It wasn't fear, even though that had been a constant companion for the past few days. No, what he felt was something different, a sense of anticipation. As though the world had changed in some subtle way, and he was at the center of it. The moment he had hit publish on his blog post the night before, something shifted. It wasn't just that his words were out there, it was that they had begun to circulate, to take on a life of their own. The post had been shared across social media, reposted by people he didn't even know, and tagged in conversations that he could barely keep up with. It was overwhelming. But it was also exhilarating. He sat on the edge of his bed, scrolling through the notifications on his phone, each one reminding him of the impact his words were having. A comment on the blog caught his eye. "I've never thought about things from this perspective. Thank you for sharing your story." Another message popped up on his phone screen. "I can't believe you said what I've been feeling for years. Your courage gave me courage." Kentai's heart swelled with emotion. This was what he had been hoping for, a connection. A dialogue. A bridge between his world and theirs. It was working. People were listening. And people were thinking. By the time he made his way to his first class of the day, Kentai's mind was racing. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he had a feeling the classroom would feel different today. As he walked through the door, he could already see the difference. The room was quieter than usual, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was thoughtful. People were glancing his way, some with curiosity, others with admiration. For the first time, Kentai felt seen. Not just as a student, but as a person with something important to say. "Hey, Kentai." Sarah's voice broke through his thoughts as she walked over to him, her eyes bright with excitement. "I saw the post. It's amazing. The way you wrote, the way you told your truth, people are responding to it. It's incredible." Kentai smiled, still a little stunned by the response. "Yeah, it's a lot more than I expected. I think you're going to start seeing more of that," Sarah said, her voice full of conviction. "People are tired of staying silent. Your story is giving them the courage to speak up too. This isn't just your story anymore. It's everyone's." That hit Kentai like a wave. It was true. His story had sparked something in others. It was no longer just about him. It was about all the people who had been holding their own truths in silence, waiting for someone to make the first move. The day passed in a blur of conversations. Students who had never spoken to him before now sought him out. It wasn't just the usual small talk, either. They were asking questions, engaging with him, wanting to know more. They were interested in his journey, in his experiences, in the things he had gone through. And it wasn't just a surface-level interest. These were real questions, questions that showed they were thinking deeply about the issues he had raised in his post. Some of them were white students who admitted they hadn't realized how different their experience was from his, while others were people of color who understood exactly what he had been talking about. It was a humbling experience, and Kentai was caught between gratitude and awe. Every conversation he had seemed to deepen the sense of purpose he had begun to feel. But it also made him more aware of the responsibility that came with sharing his story. It wasn't just about talking. It was about making sure people understood. It was about starting a conversation that could continue long after the words had been spoken. That evening, Dr. Mitchell reached out to him again, this time with an invitation to meet in his office the next day. Kentai felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness as he read the message. What did Dr. Mitchell want? Was this the beginning of something more? The next afternoon, Kentai found himself sitting across from Dr. Mitchell once again, feeling like a completely different person than the one who had walked into his office just a week ago. "You're making quite an impression, Kentai," Dr. Mitchell said with a smile. "I've been following the conversations that are happening around your post, and I have to say, I'm impressed. People are responding in ways I didn't expect." "I didn't expect it either," Kentai admitted, running a hand through his hair. "It's like it's bigger than I thought it would be. I never imagined that people would be this open about their own experiences, especially after reading mine." "That's the beauty of it," Dr. Mitchell replied. "You've sparked something. And now it's time to think about how we can help guide these conversations. You've created an opening, Kentai. Now it's time to lead the charge. What do you think?" Kentai stared at Dr. Mitchell, unsure of what he meant. Lead the charge? Dr. Mitchell nodded. Yes. You've shown that people are ready to have these conversations. The question is, how can you help direct them? How can you keep this dialogue going in a way that makes a difference? You have a platform now, one that's growing every day. And that's powerful. Kentei felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. But I don't know if I'm ready to lead anything, he said quietly. I'm still figuring all of this out myself. Dr. Mitchell leaned forward, his expression serious. That's exactly why you're the right person to lead it. You're not pretending to have all the answers. You're speaking from a place of authenticity. And that's what people need. They need someone who's willing to be honest, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Kentei felt the weight of Dr. Mitchell's words, the truth of them settling in his chest. Maybe he didn't have all the answers. But he did have a voice. And that voice was reaching people. It wasn't just about his story anymore, it was about something bigger. Something that could change the way people thought, felt, and acted. I think I understand, Kentei said after a moment, his voice quiet but determined. I'm not sure where this is going, but I want to keep pushing. I want to keep talking about the things that matter. Dr. Mitchell smiled, a proud gleam in his eyes. That's the spirit, Kentei. We'll work together to figure out how to build on this. One step at a time. As Kentei left Dr. Mitchell's office that day, he felt more certain than ever that this was just the beginning. The conversation had started, and now it was up to him, and others like him, to keep it going. The ripple effect had begun, and Kentei wasn't going to let it stop anytime soon. Kentei woke up the next morning with a new sense of purpose. His life, which had once felt like a series of disconnected moments, was beginning to align in ways he never thought possible. His blog post had sparked something, and now he found himself at the center of a movement that was bigger than he ever imagined. The conversations he'd started were just the beginning, and with Dr. Mitchell's guidance, Kentei was starting to see how this could evolve. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from Sarah. Hey, Kentei. I saw you're doing an event this weekend. That's huge. I think you're going to be a voice that people listen to. Seriously, this is just the start of something big. Kentei smiled at the message, but his heart also raced. An event? He hadn't signed up for an event. But then he remembered. Dr. Mitchell had mentioned it, an opportunity to speak to a larger audience, a platform to share his story in person. He hadn't fully processed it until now, but the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. He texted back. I didn't know it was official yet, but yeah, looks like it is. I'm nervous as hell, but I'll do it. As soon as he hit send, his mind started racing. The nerves crept in as the reality of what he was about to do started to hit him. This wasn't just writing a blog anymore, this was speaking to a room full of people. People who would see him, hear him, and maybe even judge him. That was terrifying. But it was also a chance to do something meaningful. A chance to take his story and let it resonate in ways he hadn't even begun to imagine. The event was set for that Saturday at the Student Union. It wasn't a huge auditorium, but it wasn't small either. Dr. Mitchell had arranged for the event to be part of a series of talks on campus aimed at fostering dialogue around social issues. Kentei was slated to be the first speaker. He had no idea who would show up, but it felt like the first real test of everything he had been working toward. The days leading up to the event were filled with a mix of excitement and dread. Kentei couldn't stop thinking about what he was going to say. It wasn't enough to just rehash his blog post. No, he needed to go deeper. He needed to be raw. Honest. Vulnerable. He needed to connect with the audience in a way that made them see him as more than just a student. He needed them to see his humanity, the struggles, the victories, and everything in between. He spent hours drafting his speech, revising it over and over, trying to find the right words. Every time he thought he had it down, something new popped into his mind. A different memory. A feeling. A moment of clarity he hadn't fully realized before. It was like his story was unfolding in real time, and every word he wrote made it feel more real. By the time Saturday morning arrived, Kentei was exhausted from overthinking every detail. But there was no turning back. This was it. He was going to stand in front of a room full of strangers and speak the truth he had been holding inside for so long. As he walked toward the student union that afternoon, his heart pounded in his chest. The air felt heavy, thick with anticipation. He could hear the buzz of voices around him, students chatting, laughing, going about their day. But for Kentei, everything felt muffled. It was like the world had slowed down, and he was moving through it in a haze. When he arrived at the event space, the room was already starting to fill up. The seats were scattered with a mix of students, some familiar faces, some new. As Kentei walked to the front, his mind went blank for a moment. He had practiced the speech so many times, but now that it was real, the nerves threatened to take over. Dr. Mitchell was standing by the podium, giving him a reassuring smile. "You got this," he said softly, a hand on Kentei's shoulder. "Just remember, you're here to tell your truth. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be you." Kentei nodded, swallowing hard. He stepped up to the podium, his hands slightly trembling as he adjusted the microphone. The room grew quiet, and all eyes turned to him. For a split second, the world outside disappeared. It was just him and this audience. No distractions. No walls. Just the raw power of connection. "Hi," Kentei said, his voice shaking at first but growing stronger with each word. "I'm Kentei. And I guess you could say that I've always been the quiet one. The one who sits in the back, tries to stay unnoticed. But a few days ago, I decided to change that. I decided to stop hiding." He paused, taking a deep breath, and glanced out at the crowd. He could see that they were listening, waiting for him to continue. "I've spent most of my life feeling like I didn't belong. Like the world around me was just, too much. Too loud. Too white. I've had people look at me and see only what they think they know about me, what they think they can assume. But I'm more than that. I'm more than what people see when they look at me. And that's what I wanted to say in my post. I wanted to share my truth, my story." As he spoke, Kentei could feel the walls around him start to break down. His nerves were still there, but they didn't control him anymore. The words were coming easier now, flowing from him with an honesty he hadn't known he was capable of. "I grew up in a neighborhood where I didn't see people like me going to college. Where the idea of being successful felt like a far-off dream. But I made it here. I fought my way here. And it hasn't been easy, not by a long shot. I've had to deal with rejection, with microaggressions, with people telling me I didn't belong, or that I was somehow less than. But I didn't listen. Because I knew who I was. I knew what I was capable of." Kentei felt the weight of his words settle into the room. He could see people nodding, some leaning forward, others visibly moved. He wasn't just telling his story, he was sharing a part of himself that resonated with the very people who had once made him feel invisible. "And I'm here to tell you, no matter where you come from, no matter what the world tells you about who you should be or what you should do, you have the power to rewrite your story. You don't have to let anyone define you. Not your past, not your circumstances, not your skin color, not your background. You are the author of your own life. And if you want to make a change, it starts with you." As he finished, Kentei felt a sense of relief wash over him. The room was quiet for a moment, as if everyone was absorbing what he had just said. Then, slowly, the applause began. Soft at first, then louder, more heartfelt. Kentei couldn't help but smile, a feeling of gratitude and pride swelling in his chest. The room was no longer just a classroom full of students. It had become a space of shared humanity, a place where stories collided and new connections were forged. Kentei realized, as he stood there in front of them, that this was the beginning of something bigger than himself. This was just the first step on a journey that would change everything. Kentei woke up the next morning feeling like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. The speech the day before had gone better than he could have imagined. It had been nerve-wracking, yes, but there was something transformative about standing in front of that crowd, sharing his truth, and feeling the weight of their acknowledgement. The feeling of being heard, truly heard, was overwhelming in the best possible way. As he walked into the kitchen of his dorm, he grabbed a mug and filled it with coffee, his mind still buzzing with thoughts from the day before. His phone buzzed with a new message, pulling him from his thoughts. It was from Sarah. "Hey, Kentei. You were amazing yesterday. I had chills the whole time. Seriously, your words are going to stay with people. You're going to change things around here. I can feel it." Kentei smiled and typed a quick reply. "Thanks, Sarah. It's still sinking in, to be honest. It felt like the right thing to do. But I didn't realize how powerful just telling my story could be." Before he could hit send, his phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Dr. Mitchell. "I just wanted to say how proud I am of you. Yesterday was a turning point. You didn't just speak to the room, you spoke to the heart of what this university needs. There's more to come, Kentei. We're only just beginning." Kentei's heart skipped a beat. He had known that Dr. Mitchell had a way of seeing things others didn't, but he hadn't expected him to call it a turning point. He reread the message a few times, taking in the weight of it. Maybe this wasn't just a one-time thing after all. Maybe what he was starting to build here could grow into something much bigger. He quickly texted back, "Thanks, Dr. Mitchell. I don't know what's next, but I'm ready to figure it out." The next few days were a blur. Kentei found himself invited to more and more events, some official, some informal. People wanted to hear his perspective. His voice. And it wasn't just students. Professors and staff started approaching him, offering their support, expressing how much his words had resonated with them. One afternoon, Kentei was walking through campus when he saw a large group of students gathered around a bulletin board. Curious, he approached and found that a flyer for an upcoming campus event was being passed around. The headline read, "Breaking Barriers, a Conversation on Race, Identity, and the Power of Storytelling." Kentei's heart raced as he looked at the flyer. There, in bold letters, was his name. He was listed as one of the speakers. His hands trembled as he scanned the rest of the flyer, which promised discussions on how race and identity influenced not just personal experiences, but the broader campus culture. There would be multiple panels, a discussion on intersectionality, and a chance for students to engage directly with the speakers. And then there was Kentei's panel. This wasn't just any ordinary panel. This was the big one. The flyer had already been shared across social media, and the event was quickly gaining traction. Kentei couldn't help but feel both exhilarated and intimidated. Was he ready for this? Was he really the person who should be speaking on this stage? His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Dr. Mitchell. "Kentei, I just saw the flyer. I couldn't be prouder of you. This event is the next step in what I see as the start of something very important. This is where you continue the work you've started. The campus is ready for this. I hope you'll join the conversation as one of our lead speakers." Kentei stared at the message for a long moment. It was clear that this wasn't just a chance for him to speak, it was an opportunity to make a real impact. And even though the idea of being on such a large stage still filled him with a mix of excitement and terror, Kentei knew one thing: he couldn't back down now. Not after everything he'd started. That evening, Kentei sat down to plan his speech for the panel. He had a lot of thoughts swirling in his head, but how could he possibly condense everything he wanted to say into a brief segment for the event? His heart raced as he typed his notes, moving from one thought to the next, trying to make sense of all the emotions and ideas that had been building inside of him since that first blog post. I can't let them forget the humanity behind this conversation, he muttered to himself as he wrote. It's not about statistics or data. It's about real people, real lives, real stories. As he went on, he began to draw connections between what he had shared with the world so far and the broader issues that still needed to be addressed. His story, while deeply personal, was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. It wasn't just about his experiences, it was about the systems that had allowed people to like him to feel invisible, to feel unheard. The next few days were filled with rehearsals and meetings. Kentei's speech evolved over time as he refined his message. He wanted to make sure that when he spoke, he wasn't just telling his own story. He wanted to speak for those who couldn't. The ones who still felt invisible. The ones who still hadn't found their voice. Finally, the day of the event arrived. Kentei stood backstage, pacing nervously, his stomach twisting with anxiety. He glanced at the list of speakers and couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude. He was sharing the stage with some heavy hitters, professors, activists, and community leaders. People who had been fighting this fight long before he had even considered joining it. When his turn came, Kentei stepped out into the spotlight, his heart pounding in his chest. The room was filled with faces, some familiar, some new, and their eyes were all on him. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. Then he remembered Dr. Mitchell's words. Just be you. Speak your truth. He took a deep breath, looked around the room, and began. Hey, everyone. I'm Kentei. And if you'd asked me 6 months ago if I'd be standing here right now, I would have laughed. I never thought I'd be the one speaking up. I thought I was just a kid from a rough neighborhood trying to stay out of trouble. But I've learned something important over the past few months. I've learned that you can't stay silent anymore. You can't wait for someone else to tell your story. You have to tell it yourself. The words came more easily now, flowing from him in a way they never had before. As he spoke, he could see the faces in the audience shift, some nodding in agreement, others leaning in, fully engaged. He knew the message was hitting home. This isn't just my story, he continued. It's the story of so many people who never had the chance to speak up. It's about the systems that try to silence us. It's about the people who try to tell us that we don't belong. But here's the thing, we do belong. We belong everywhere. Kentei could feel the energy in the room shift. There was no more tension in his chest. The nervousness had been replaced by a quiet confidence. This was his time to be heard. Every one of us has the power to break the barriers that hold us back. But we have to do it together. We have to speak for each other. And if you're ever in doubt, just remember this, your voice is powerful. And no one can take that away. The room erupted in applause as Kentei finished, and for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like an outsider. He felt like he had a place here, a real place. A place where his voice mattered. After the panel, Kentei couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. The words he had spoken, the way the crowd had responded, it was like nothing he had ever experienced before. He had spent so long doubting himself, questioning whether his voice was worth hearing. But now, standing in the aftermath of that moment, he realized that his voice did matter. Not just to the people in that room, but to the countless others who had been silently struggling with the same challenges he had faced. That night, as Kentei sat in his dorm room, his phone buzzed again. The messages were rolling in faster than he could keep up. Some were from fellow students, others from faculty members. But there was one that stood out. It was from Dr. Mitchell. Kentei, that was incredible. I hope you realize that this is just the beginning. But be prepared, the more you speak up, the more you will face opposition. People don't like to have their comfort zones disrupted. Stay grounded. Stay true to your message. Kentei stared at the message for a moment, absorbing Dr. Mitchell's words. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of purpose, but he also felt the weight of responsibility. Speaking up came with its own set of challenges. As Dr. Mitchell had warned, disruption always triggered resistance. He knew that moving forward wouldn't be easy, but it was the path he had chosen. And there was no turning back now. The next few days were filled with mixed emotions. On one hand, Kentei was riding high on the success of the event. He had been invited to speak at another university panel and was now being approached by students from different disciplines, all eager to hear more of his story. But on the other hand, there were whispers. The kind of whispers that came from students who were uncomfortable with the way things had been shaken up. And that discomfort wasn't limited to just students. Some of the faculty had started to express their unease, too. It wasn't blatant, but Kentei could feel it, the subtle pushback from those who didn't want to confront the deeper issues he was raising. It was Friday afternoon when Kentei received an email from the university administration. His stomach tightened as he opened it. The subject line read, "Follow-up on recent campus events." He clicked on it. "Dear Kentei, we would like to acknowledge your recent contributions to the panel discussions on race, identity, and campus culture. Your insights have sparked important conversations, and we believe these conversations are crucial to the evolution of our university. However, some concerns have been raised about the tone of your remarks and their potential to create division among students. We would like to schedule a meeting to discuss your involvement in future campus events and ensure that all voices are being heard. Please let us know your availability for a meeting next week. Regards. Office of Student Affairs." Kentei sat frozen, staring at the email for what felt like an eternity. Potential to create division. He reread those words, trying to make sense of them. All he had done was speak his truth. Wasn't that what everyone had encouraged him to do? Wasn't that what the university had been asking for? But in that moment, Kentei felt the weight of Dr. Mitchell's warning. This was the beginning of the storm. He immediately texted Dr. Mitchell, sharing the email. "I'm being asked to meet with the administration. They said my remarks are creating division. What do I do?" Dr. Mitchell's reply was swift. "It's what we talked about, Kentei. Change always comes with pushback. Don't back down. But be prepared. This is where things get complicated. They might try to shift the narrative, make you feel like you're doing something wrong. But you're not. You just need to stay true to the cause." Kentei took a deep breath and stared at his phone, the weight of the situation settling in. He had always known there would be resistance, but it didn't make it any easier to face. The fight he had started, the voice he had raised, was beginning to feel like it was attracting more attention, both positive and negative. The next few days felt like a blur. Kentei couldn't focus on his studies. His mind was preoccupied with the upcoming meeting with the administration. He had no idea what they would ask of him, or what direction they would try to steer the conversation. But he knew one thing for sure, he couldn't back down now. Not after everything he had built. Not after the way people had started to listen. That Sunday afternoon, as Kentei sat in his dorm room preparing for the meeting, he couldn't help but think back to the first time he had doubted his ability to make a difference. Back when he had felt invisible. Now, he had a voice, a powerful one, and he wasn't about to let anyone silence it. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. He had rehearsed his points, prepared himself for every possible question they might throw his way. But as he sat there, staring at his reflection in the mirror, he knew that no matter how prepared he was, this moment would challenge him in ways he couldn't predict. He had a choice to make: continue the fight he had started, or back down and retreat into the safety of silence. There was no doubt in his mind what the right choice was. The following Tuesday, Kentei walked into the office of the Student Affairs Department, his palms sweating and his heart beating in his chest. He had been through plenty of tough situations in his life, but this was different. This wasn't just a meeting, it was a test of everything he had fought for so far. And it wasn't just his story on the line. It was the stories of everyone who had been marginalized, who had been told they didn't belong. The room was sterile and clinical, nothing like the lively discussions he had been a part of just days before. 3 administrators sat at a large, polished table, all of them wearing the same neutral expressions. Kentei took a seat at the head of the table, feeling like an outsider once again. "Thank you for meeting with us, Kentei," one of the administrators said, her tone formal. "We just want to have an open conversation about your recent remarks and the impact they're having on the campus community." Kentei nodded, his mind racing. He had heard the question before, he knew exactly what they were getting at. But he wasn't going to let that intimidate him. "I appreciate the opportunity," Kentei said, keeping his voice steady. "But I'm not here to apologize for speaking my truth. I think it's time we face the uncomfortable realities that have been ignored for too long. If my words have created division, then maybe it's the divisions that need to be addressed, not the words." There was a brief pause, and then one of the administrators spoke again. "We understand your perspective, Kentei. But the university's mission is to promote unity. It's important that we ensure all voices are heard, not just the voices of a select few." "I agree," Kentei replied. "But sometimes, unity isn't about silence. It's about confronting uncomfortable truths, even when it feels messy. And if you're asking me to keep quiet to keep things unified, then I have to ask, at what cost? At what point do we decide that the truth is more important than keeping the peace?" He could see the administrators shift in their seats, but Kentei wasn't backing down. He knew what he was up against, and he was ready to stand his ground. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The meeting with the administration left Kentei feeling more unsettled than ever. The way they had tried to balance their concern with their need to maintain the university's image, it all felt like a subtle form of control. They were worried about how the conversation was unfolding, not why it was happening. Kentei had expected some pushback, but what stung the most was how they tried to twist his desire for change into something to be feared. As he left the office, his thoughts swirled around in his mind. The encounter was a stark reminder that real change was never easy. People were willing to listen to your message, but only as long as it didn't threaten their status quo. And that was exactly what Kentei was doing. He was shaking things up. Challenging a system that had been built to keep certain voices silent. And that kind of disruption was never going to come without consequences. That evening, as Kentei walked across campus, he couldn't shake the feeling of isolation. The weight of the administration's scrutiny, paired with the subtle tension he felt from some of the students who were starting to distance themselves, made him feel more alone than ever before. He walked past the bustling student union, hearing snippets of conversation, but no one stopped him. No one reached out. It was as if they didn't know what to say to him anymore. Some students had come to him after the panel and offered their support, but others seemed to be avoiding him. He couldn't tell if it was fear or discomfort, but it stung all the same. "Hey, Kentei." He turned at the sound of his name, and there stood Sarah, her face a mixture of concern and determination. Sarah had been his most vocal supporter from the start. She had always been there for him, even when the odds felt insurmountable. But even she seemed to be walking on eggshells now. "Hey, Sarah," he said, trying to force a smile. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft, like she already knew the answer. Kentei shrugged, not wanting to admit how much he was struggling. "I don't know, Sarah. This whole thing. It feels like the more I try to change, the more people want me to just stop. It's like they're scared of what I'm saying, even though all I'm doing is speaking the truth." Sarah looked around, making sure no one was listening before she leaned in closer. "You've already made an impact. But, yeah, I can feel it too. The tension. People don't like being forced to confront things they don't want to see. But that's exactly why you can't stop. You can't let them silence you now." Kentei nodded, grateful for her words. But there was still that gnawing feeling in his gut. He had started this journey to make a difference, to have his voice heard, but now that it was happening, he didn't feel the sense of victory he had imagined. He felt more isolated than ever before. Over the next few days, Kentei's world became a series of highs and lows. In the classroom, he had started receiving mixed reactions. Some students were more open than ever, asking him questions about his experiences and what they could do to help address the issues he had raised. But others were more distant, avoiding eye contact, even rolling their eyes when the subject came up. It wasn't just the students, faculty members started to pull back as well. Kentei noticed that Dr. Mitchell had become less accessible, and their meetings, which had once been filled with enthusiasm, now felt more strained. There was a subtle shift in the air, an unspoken question of whether Kentei had gone too far. Then, one afternoon, Kentei received an anonymous message in his inbox. It was short, and the tone was unmistakably hostile. "You think you can just come in here and change everything? Keep pushing and you'll see what happens. Some people don't take kindly to troublemakers like you." Kentei stared at the message, his fingers gripping the phone tightly. It wasn't the first time he had received a message like this, but it was different. This one felt personal. It wasn't just someone disagreeing with his perspective, it was someone threatening him. His heart pounded in his chest. He thought about the warnings Dr. Mitchell had given him. He thought about what he had been told in that meeting with the administration, the delicate balance they were trying to maintain. Could it be that the pushback was more than just discomfort? Could it be that there were people who wanted to silence him permanently? Kentei didn't know what to do with the message. It rattled him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He had grown up in an environment where threats weren't unusual, where people didn't always speak their truth because of the fear of retaliation. But here, in this place, on this campus, he had thought it would be different. He had thought that by speaking up, he could make a positive difference. But now, he wasn't so sure. The next morning, Kentei woke up feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. His phone was still buzzing with notifications, but it all felt like white noise. The anonymous message hung over him like a dark cloud. He had always prided himself on being able to rise above challenges, to push through adversity. But today, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. That the stakes had grown higher. He sat down on his bed, his head in his hands, and tried to think things through. What was he really up against? Was it just a few voices of dissent? Or was he facing a system that had been set in place long before he ever arrived? He needed someone to talk to, someone who understood the gravity of the situation. Someone who wouldn't tell him to back down, but who would help him make sense of it all. That someone, he knew, was Dr. Mitchell. Kentei texted him, "Can we meet? I need some advice. I'm feeling like I'm walking a really thin line right now." Within moments, Dr. Mitchell responded, "Of course. I'm in my office. Come by when you can." Kentei didn't hesitate. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the campus, his mind still spinning. The meeting with Dr. Mitchell couldn't come soon enough. When Kentei arrived at Dr. Mitchell's office, the professor greeted him with a smile that felt reassuring, though it couldn't entirely erase the sense of anxiety that had settled in Kentei's chest. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders," Dr. Mitchell said as they both sat down. "What's going on?" Kentei explained everything, the pushback, the anonymous message, the tension he was feeling from both students and faculty. He didn't hold back. It felt good to finally speak the words out loud, to have someone who understood. Dr. Mitchell listened carefully, his expression serious. "Kentei, what you're experiencing is real. And it's exactly why your voice matters so much. People who challenge the status quo will always face resistance. But don't let that deter you. This is part of the process." Kentei frowned. "But it feels like it's more than just resistance. It feels dangerous. Like there's something I don't see, something behind the scenes that's pushing against me." Dr. Mitchell paused before responding, his voice calm but firm. "There are always forces at work that want to maintain control. But remember, you're not alone. You have allies. And more importantly, you have the truth on your side. Don't let fear drive you to silence. Kentei took a deep breath, letting Dr. Mitchell's words sink in. He had always believed that the truth could change things, but now he understood that the truth alone wasn't enough. The truth would always be challenged. And it was in those moments of challenge that the real fight would begin. The next few days felt like a blur to Kentei. The weight of the threats, the mixed reactions from his peers, and the growing tension on campus had begun to take its toll. He wasn't sleeping well anymore. Every time his phone buzzed, his heart raced, wondering if it was another anonymous message or a notification from the administration asking him to explain himself again. But it wasn't just the external pressures. Internally, Kentei wrestled with his own doubts. Dr. Mitchell's words echoed in his mind, "You have the truth on your side." But the truth felt like a double-edged sword. While it was freeing to speak up, it also brought with it a kind of isolation he hadn't anticipated. The more he shared his story, the more people pulled away, unsure how to engage with someone who was so open about his struggles. Kentei had hoped for solidarity, for others to rise up and stand with him, but instead, he often found himself standing alone. Despite all of this, Kentei still couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the cusp of something important, something that could change not just his life, but the lives of countless others who had felt invisible. And so, as much as he wanted to retreat, he knew that there was no turning back. The storm was here. The only way forward was through it. It was a Wednesday when Kentei received an unexpected phone call. He was in his dorm room, sitting on his bed, trying to catch up on his assignments but finding it impossible to concentrate. The name on the screen read, Dr. Mitchell. "Hello. Kentei, I need you to meet me." Right away, Dr. Mitchell's voice was urgent, almost strained. "I've just been informed of something, and it's important that you know about it. It's about the administration." Kentei's pulse quickened. "What happened? What's going on?" "There's been a decision made about your involvement with future events. You're being pulled from the upcoming panel discussion. And I'm afraid it's just the beginning of a larger crackdown." Kentei felt his chest tighten. "Are you serious? They can't just..." "I know. But I need you to come to my office right now. We need to talk face to face." Kentei didn't hesitate. He grabbed his jacket and headed straight for the campus, his mind racing with a million thoughts. What was this about? Was it really happening? Were they going to shut him down completely? As he walked across campus, the weight of the impending conversation bore down on him. Every step felt heavier than the last. The buildings that had once felt like places of learning now seemed like cold, imposing structures. The campus had transformed in Kentei's eyes. It was no longer a place of opportunity and growth, it had become a battleground. And Kentei was caught right in the middle of it. When he arrived at Dr. Mitchell's office, the professor was waiting for him, pacing anxiously. His usually composed demeanor was gone. The air between them felt tense, like they were preparing for something neither of them could control. Dr. Mitchell motioned for Kentei to sit. "I wish I had better news. The university has decided to temporarily suspend your involvement in any further panel discussions or public forums. They're citing concerns about the disruptive nature of your remarks and the unrest they've caused." Kentei stared at Dr. Mitchell, stunned. His breath caught in his throat. "Are you saying they're punishing me for speaking out?" "I'm afraid so. But you need to understand that this isn't just about you," Dr. Mitchell continued. "It's about a larger effort to stifle dissent on this campus. They're trying to shut you down to prevent others from speaking out." Kentei's mind was racing. His first instinct was to react in anger, but a part of him knew that would only play into their hands. He had to think strategically. "So, what now? Do I just sit here and let them silence me?" "No," Dr. Mitchell said firmly. "But you need to be smart. You need to plan your next move carefully. There's a rally planned for next week. I want you to be ready for it. Don't back down. Your voice matters. But this fight is going to be long. And it won't be easy. Kentei nodded, his thoughts clouded by uncertainty. He felt like he was being cornered. The message from the administration was clear: he had overstepped, and now he would face the consequences. But it wasn't just about him. He knew that, if he gave in now, it would send a message that silence was the only acceptable response to injustice. Dr. Mitchell's voice broke through his thoughts. Kentei, I know this is hard, but I want you to remember something: the greatest change comes from the hardest battles. Don't let fear win. Don't let them make you feel small. Kentei looked at the professor, the man who had believed in him from the start. I won't, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. I won't back down. Not now. The conversation ended, but the weight of the decision loomed over Kentei. He was being asked to make a choice that would shape his future. Would he continue to stand tall, even when it felt like the world was conspiring against him? Or would he retreat, protect himself, and avoid further conflict? He walked back to his dorm room, lost in thought. There was no doubt that things were escalating. But Kentei was beginning to realize something important. The more he stood up, the more resistance he faced, but it wasn't just resistance, it was an acknowledgement. People were paying attention. They were hearing what he had to say. The rally Dr. Mitchell had mentioned was scheduled for the following Friday. Kentei wasn't sure what he was walking into, but he knew it was his chance to take the fight to the next level. It was his opportunity to rally others, to show that he wasn't alone. But with that opportunity came a risk that, if things didn't go as planned, he could find himself isolated in a way he hadn't anticipated. As he sat down at his desk, Kentei made a decision. He would go to that rally. He would speak his truth, even if it meant facing the full force of the opposition. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who had been pushed to the margins, everyone who had been told to be quiet, to stay in their place. He was done staying silent. Friday morning arrived with an uneasy tension in the air. Kentei woke up early, the weight of what lay ahead pressing heavily on his chest. The rally wasn't just another campus event, it was his turning point. He could feel it in every fiber of his being. This was the moment that would define his path forward. It wasn't just about his voice anymore, it was about all the voices that had been ignored, all the voices that had been silenced for far too long. Kentei walked across the campus, the cool morning air biting at his skin, but it did little to calm his nerves. There was a certain energy in the air, a sense of anticipation, but also of fear. Students milled around the main quad, the usual buzz of conversations now tinged with something more serious. Whispers of the rally spread, and although some students had expressed their support for Kentei, he couldn't shake the feeling that many were waiting to see what would happen next. As he made his way to the designated meeting point for the rally, he noticed a few familiar faces: Sarah, Trey, and even some students he hadn't expected to see there. They were all gathered, standing together, a small but determined crowd. There was no sign of the administration yet, no campus security looming nearby, though Kentei was sure they were watching from the shadows. "Hey, you made it," Sarah said, offering him a warm smile. "I was worried you might back out." Kentei forced a smile back, though he could feel his heart racing in his chest. "Not a chance," he replied. "I'm here to make sure we're heard." Trey, standing beside Sarah, clapped Kentei on the back. "We've got your back, man. The more people see this, the more they'll understand what you're fighting for." Kentei nodded, his eyes scanning the growing crowd. Students continued to gather, a few hesitant, but most with a quiet resolve. This wasn't just about him anymore. It had become something larger, something more powerful. Then, Kentei spotted Dr. Mitchell, walking toward them with a serious expression. He approached the group with a brief nod and glanced at Kentei. "You ready for this?" Dr. Mitchell asked, his voice calm but with an undertone of concern. "As ready as I'll ever be," Kentei replied. Dr. Mitchell smiled faintly, but there was a weariness in his eyes that Kente couldn't ignore. Just remember, Kente, this isn't just about making noise. It's about sending a message that can't be ignored. Keep your focus. Don't let them bait you into something you're not prepared for. Kente felt a surge of determination. He understood exactly what Dr. Mitchell meant. The administration would be watching, and they would try to provoke him. They might even try to shut the event down before it gained any real momentum. But Kente couldn't let that happen. This was his moment to stand tall, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been told to stay quiet. The crowd began to grow, more students trickling in from all directions. Some were cautiously glancing around, unsure of what to expect, but others were standing tall, their faces determined. Kente knew it wouldn't be long before campus security arrived, maybe even the police, to try to control the crowd. But he wasn't backing down now. As he stepped to the front of the crowd, the murmurs of conversation slowly died down. The air was thick with anticipation. Kente took a deep breath, his hands slightly trembling as he reached for the microphone. "I want to thank you all for being here today," Kente began, his voice loud and clear. "I know some of you are here because you believe in the same things I do. And some of you, well, you might be here to see what happens. But no matter why you're here, I need you to listen. Because what I'm about to say matters." He paused, glancing at the faces in the crowd. Some were students he had known for years, others, he barely recognized. But they were all there for one reason: change. Kente could feel the weight of their eyes on him, their hope in him, their expectation. "We're here because we believe in the power of our voices," Kente continued, his tone rising with intensity. "We're here because we've been silenced for far too long. And no matter what they tell you, no matter how hard they try to shut us down, we will not be quiet anymore." A cheer rippled through the crowd, a small but unmistakable wave of energy. Kente felt it, too, a spark that ignited something within him. The feeling of solidarity. It was real. This wasn't just a rally, it was a movement. "I'm not here because I want to make trouble," Kente continued, his voice growing stronger. "I'm here because the truth matters. I'm here because we deserve better. We deserve an education that isn't just about memorizing facts, but about learning to think critically, to challenge the world around us. To make it better. We deserve a campus that listens, that hears the voices of everyone, not just the ones with the power to speak over us." His words hung in the air, and Kente could see the faces in the crowd shift. Some were nodding in agreement. Others were still uncertain, unsure of where this was headed. But there was no turning back. This was the point of no return. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps interrupted the moment. Kente turned, his heart skipping a beat. A group of administrators, led by Dean Thompson, was approaching. Kente knew the moment had arrived. The moment when everything would come to a head. Dean Thompson, a stern-faced man with a reputation for strict control, stepped forward, flanked by two security officers. He held a clipboard in his hands, his expression cold. "Kente, I'm afraid this rally is in violation of university policy," Dean Thompson said, his voice clipped. "You've been asked to stop promoting this event, and yet here you are, defying direct orders." The crowd fell silent. The tension in the air was palpable. Kente could feel the heat of their eyes on him, waiting for his response. "I'm not stopping," Kente said, his voice unwavering. "Not now. Not ever." Dean Thompson's eyes narrowed. "Then we'll have no choice but to disperse this rally. You're disrupting the campus. You're causing unrest." Kente stepped forward, meeting the dean's gaze. Maybe it's time someone caused some unrest. Maybe it's time someone stood up and said enough is enough. A murmur ran through the crowd, growing louder. The students weren't backing down. They weren't going to let the administration push them around anymore. Dean Thompson hesitated, clearly caught off guard by the resolve in Kente's voice. But the administrators weren't backing down either. The situation was escalating quickly. Before things could escalate further, Dr. Mitchell stepped forward, his voice calm but authoritative. "Dean Thompson, these students have a right to assemble. This is protected under university policy. You can't shut them down just because you don't like what they're saying." Dean Thompson glared at Dr. Mitchell, but the professor stood his ground. "If you want to shut this down, you'll have to go through me first." The standoff between the administration and the students felt like it could go either way. But Kente wasn't about to let the moment slip away. With one final glance at the crowd, he raised his voice one last time. "We won't back down. We will keep fighting for what's right. And we will be heard." The crowd erupted in cheers, and for a brief moment, it felt as though the entire campus had shifted. Kente knew this was only the beginning, but it was a beginning that could not be undone. The days following the rally were a blur. What began as a hopeful and unifying moment had quickly turned into a full-scale conflict. The administration, though momentarily shaken, wasn't about to let Kente's act of defiance go unpunished. The rally had forced the university's hand, and now they were responding with force. Kente found himself at the center of a storm. His phone was flooded with messages, some supportive, others hostile. The campus had divided into two camps, those who praised his courage, and those who labeled him as a troublemaker, a disruption to the peace of the institution. He was both revered and reviled, and Kente couldn't help but feel a strange mix of pride and fear. The administration had acted swiftly. His participation in future university-sponsored events had been indefinitely suspended. The panel he had been scheduled to speak on was cancelled. They claimed it was a safety measure, but Kente knew the truth: the university was trying to shut him down. The threats of expulsion loomed over him like a dark cloud, a constant reminder of what could happen if he didn't comply. It wasn't just the official sanctions that weighed on Kente. There was a subtle, pervasive isolation. Friends who had once been close began to distance themselves. Some students had been vocal in their support, but the majority remained silent. Kente had always known that speaking up for what was right would come at a cost, but nothing had prepared him for this kind of alienation. One night, as he sat in his dorm room, scrolling through the endless stream of social media posts about him, his door knocked. It was a gentle, tentative knock, but Kente didn't need to guess who it was. "Hey, Kente. You all right?" Sarah's voice came through the door. Kente stood up and opened it. Sarah stood in the hallway, her expression serious but soft. She had been one of the few who had stayed by his side since the rally, and he was grateful for that. "I don't know," he admitted, stepping aside to let her in. "I feel like I'm losing everything. Friends, opportunities. The university is doing everything they can to make me shut up." Sarah stepped into the room, her eyes scanning the cluttered space. She took a seat on the edge of his bed. "It's not just you. A lot of people are scared. They're scared of what you're saying because it's true. They're scared of the change you're asking for." Kente sat down next to her, running his hand through his hair. "It's just, so overwhelming. I never expected it to go this far. I thought the rally would be a moment, but now I don't know how to handle what's happening." Sarah looked at him with a gentle but firm gaze. "What's happening is that people are starting to listen. And that's terrifying for them. But you've got to keep going, Kente. You're doing something important, and you're not in this alone." Kente looked at her, a deep sense of gratitude swelling in his chest. She had always been there, a steady presence amidst the chaos. But he couldn't help but wonder, was it worth it? Was it worth losing everything, even the friendships that seemed so vital to his sense of self? "Why are you still here?" Kente asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because I believe in you," Sarah replied. "I believe in what you're fighting for. And I believe that, in the end, it'll be worth it." Kente leaned back against the wall, letting her words sink in. He had always known Sarah as someone who stood up for what was right, but hearing her say it now, it gave him strength. "Thanks," he said, his voice steadying. "I needed to hear that." The silence between them felt comfortable, but also heavy. There was so much more left to say, but both of them understood that words couldn't capture everything Kente was feeling. Just then, his phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text message from Dr. Mitchell. Kente quickly opened it. "We need to meet. The administration is escalating their response. You've got to be prepared for what's coming next. Come to my office as soon as you can." Kente's stomach sank. He had a feeling he knew exactly what Dr. Mitchell meant. "I've got to go," he said, standing up. "Dr. Mitchell wants to see me." Sarah stood as well, her eyes full of concern. "Be careful. I don't like where this is going." "I will," Kente replied. "But I have to see this through. I can't back down now." Dr. Mitchell's office was quiet when Kente arrived. The professor was standing by the window, staring out into the campus. His posture was tense, and there was an urgency in the air that Kente hadn't sensed before. "Dr. Mitchell?" Kente asked, his voice uncertain. The professor turned to face him, his expression grave. "Kente, things are escalating. I've just received word that the administration is planning to take legal action against you. They're accusing you of inciting unrest, and they're threatening disciplinary measures that could lead to expulsion." Kente felt his chest tighten. "What does that mean? What can I do?" "You need to be prepared," Dr. Mitchell replied, sitting down at his desk. "They want to silence you, Kente. And they'll do whatever it takes to make you comply. But you can't let them intimidate you." Kente sank into the chair across from Dr. Mitchell. His mind was reeling. Expulsion. Legal action. He had known the consequences would be harsh, but this felt like it was spiraling beyond anything he could control. "I didn't think it would go this far," Kente admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "I just wanted to speak the truth. I never imagined it would come to this." Dr. Mitchell nodded, his face softening. "I know. But you've awakened something in this campus. And as much as they want to shut you down, what you've started can't be stopped. It's bigger than all of us." Kente looked at Dr. Mitchell, his eyes brimming with emotion. "I don't know if I can keep going. The pressure, it's too much. I feel like I'm losing everything." "You're not losing everything, Dr. Mitchell said gently. "What you're doing right now is hard. And it's going to get harder. But sometimes the most important work is the work that comes with the greatest cost. You have to decide if you're willing to pay that price." Kente sat in silence, the weight of his decision settling over him like a thick fog. He had started this fight with hope, with the belief that change was possible. But now, facing the reality of everything that was at stake, he felt the full magnitude of what it meant to challenge the system. But as he looked up at Dr. Mitchell, he knew one thing for certain: backing down was no longer an option. He had already come too far. Kente stood at the edge of the campus courtyard, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on him. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the sprawling academic buildings. He should have felt the warm, familiar comfort of the campus he had grown to love, but all he could feel now was a growing unease, a sense that everything was beginning to fracture. The rally had been just the beginning. The threats of expulsion, the legal actions looming over him, the increasing isolation from some of his peers, everything was building toward a breaking point. Every decision he made felt like it was taking him further down a path he hadn't fully anticipated. The noise around him, students talking, cars passing by, the distant hum of the campus, felt distant, like a world he no longer belonged to. Kente's world had shifted. The noise he heard now wasn't just the sound of life going on as usual, it was the sound of a battle, of something larger than him, and that was both terrifying and exhilarating. "Hey, Kente." The voice broke through his thoughts, and he turned to see Sarah standing a few feet away, looking concerned, her arms crossed. Her expression was a mixture of determination and worry. Kente had come to rely on Sarah's unwavering presence through the chaos, but he knew this situation was beginning to take its toll on her as well. He gave her a half-hearted smile. "Hey. What's up?" Sarah walked over to him, her eyes scanning his face for any sign of what he was truly feeling. "You okay? I've been trying to reach you all day. I know you're under a lot of pressure, but I need to know you're all right." Kente hesitated before responding. "I don't know. I've been thinking a lot, about everything. The rally. The consequences. The future. It's like the more I try to stand up for what's right, the more everything seems to collapse around me." Sarah didn't say anything for a moment. She stood beside him, looking out at the campus with him, as though trying to understand exactly what he was going through. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but filled with a quiet strength. "I know it feels like everything's falling apart," she said, "but look at how far you've come. You've made them see you, Kente. The university, the people in power, they didn't expect this. They didn't expect someone like you to stand up and force them to listen." Kente sighed and shook his head. "But they're going to make me regret it. They've already got me in their crosshairs. The administration's made it clear they're not going to stop until they've silenced me. And it's not just about me anymore, Sarah. I've put everyone I care about in danger too. People are afraid of being associated with me. I can see it in their eyes." "You're not in this alone," Sarah said firmly. "I'm with you. So are Trey, Dr. Mitchell, and a lot of others. People are standing behind you, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. And yeah, maybe it's hard, but that's what this fight is about. It's not about doing the easy thing. It's about doing the right thing." Kente turned to face her, his eyes filled with frustration. "But what if doing the right thing means I lose everything? What if it means I lose my future? My friends? What if it means I end up alone?" Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder, her gaze softening. "Kente, sometimes the right thing costs more than we're ready to pay. But that doesn't mean it's not worth it. The world's full of people who've backed down when things got hard. But the people who change the world, who make a real difference, they're the ones who don't give up. Even when it feels like everything's falling apart." Kente felt a lump form in his throat. "What if I can't do it? What if I'm not strong enough?" "Then you let us be strong for you," Sarah replied gently. "We're all here, Kente. We're fighting this battle together." Her words, simple but sincere, grounded him. He realized, for the first time in days, that he wasn't truly alone. He had a team, people who saw his vision, who understood the stakes, and who believed in him. They were all risking something, yes, but they were standing by him. A strange sense of peace washed over him as he looked at Sarah. "Thanks," he said quietly. "I needed to hear that. I just don't know what comes next. I don't know how to stop this from getting worse." "You don't have to figure it all out right now," Sarah said, her voice soothing. "But the one thing you can do is keep going. Don't stop. You've started something that can't be stopped by just threats or fear. They can try to silence you, but the message you've started, it's bigger than all of them." Kente nodded, his mind racing with 100 thoughts. But at that moment, he realized something important. The pressure he was feeling, the weight of everything, wasn't just something he had to bear alone. It was a collective struggle. He was fighting for a cause that others shared, and together, they were stronger than the forces trying to suppress them. That night, Kente sat in his room, staring at his phone. The messages were still coming in, more supportive ones than before, but still a steady stream of threats and insults. He tried not to let it get to him, but it was hard. Each notification felt like another blow, another reminder of the risks he was taking. But something in him had shifted. A quiet resolve had taken root deep inside. Kente knew that he could no longer turn back, no matter how hard the road ahead would be. He had made his choice. And now, he had to see it through. The next morning, Kente met with Dr. Mitchell again. The professor's office had become a safe haven for him, a place where he could be reminded of the bigger picture, the purpose behind all of this. But as Kente walked in, he could see the urgency in Dr. Mitchell's eyes. "We don't have much time," Dr. Mitchell said, closing the door behind Kente. "The university is preparing for legal action against you. They're threatening to go public with everything, the rally, the unrest. They want to paint you as a radical, a disruptor." Kente's stomach churned. "What do I do? How do I fight back?" "You keep speaking the truth," Dr. Mitchell replied. "You don't back down. If they want to go public, you'll go public too. This fight is bigger than just you, Kente. It's about the way this campus has treated its students, especially those like you who've been marginalized. It's time to hold them accountable." Kente felt the weight of Dr. Mitchell's words sink in. "Okay," he said, his voice steady. "I'm ready." For the first time in days, Kente felt a spark of hope flicker in his chest. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time, he wasn't going to back down. The day after his meeting with Dr. Mitchell, Kente found himself in a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and messages. His life had shifted into high gear, and everything around him seemed to be moving at an unrelenting pace. The threat of expulsion was no longer a distant possibility, it was imminent. The legal team representing the university had officially started proceedings, and Kente was expected to attend a disciplinary hearing in the coming days. The pressure was almost unbearable. Every day felt like an emotional roller coaster, one moment filled with determination, the next with fear and doubt. But through it all, one thing kept him going, the unwavering support from his friends, and most notably, Sarah. Still, Kente couldn't help but wonder what had become of the other students on campus, the ones who had rallied behind him at the beginning, the ones who had cheered during the protest. Were they still with him? Or had they faded into the background, too scared to be seen with him now that the university was coming down hard? On the fourth day since the disciplinary hearing notice, Kente was sitting outside his dorm, trying to clear his head. He needed space. Needed to think. The air was crisp, and the sky was a clear blue, offering some semblance of peace, but he knew it wouldn't last. "Hey, Kente." Kente looked up, startled by the voice. It wasn't Sarah this time. Standing in front of him was Jackson, a student he had barely spoken to before all of this. Jackson was a junior in the history department, a quiet guy who had often kept to himself, even in the larger classroom settings. Kente knew who he was, but they had never really been close. "Jackson, right?" Kente said, standing up, unsure of what to expect. He had always thought Jackson was indifferent to the protests and the issues Kente had been raising on campus. Why was he here now? "Yeah, that's me," Jackson replied, shifting nervously. "Can we talk?" Kente nodded, a little skeptical. "Sure. What's up?" Jackson sat down next to him, glancing around as though to make sure no one else was watching. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "I've been hearing a lot of things about you, Kente. And I just wanted to say, I think what you're doing is right. You're doing what no one else has the guts to do." Kente blinked in surprise. "Wait, you've been hearing stuff?" "What kind of stuff?" Jackson shifted uncomfortably, but then spoke with more confidence. "People are talking. Some are supportive, but others are, well, you know how it is. A lot of people are scared of what's happening. People are scared of you." He paused, then added, "But I don't think you're a troublemaker. You're trying to change things, and that's what matters." Kente processed Jackson's words, still unsure of what this conversation meant. "Okay. So why are you talking to me now? I haven't exactly been the most popular guy on campus these days." Jackson looked down at the ground, his expression serious. I wasn't sure about you at first. I thought you were stirring up a lot of trouble. But after everything that's happened, after seeing how they're treating you, I started to realize something. They're treating you like a threat. And when they treat someone like a threat, it means they're scared of what that person stands for. Kentei raised an eyebrow. So what do you want from me, Jackson? Jackson hesitated but then leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. I want to help you. Kentei's heart skipped a beat. Help me? How? Look, Jackson said, glancing around to ensure no one was listening, I've been talking to some people. People who've been watching everything unfold. And there's a lot more support for you than you realize. I think we can make some noise. Not just on social media or in the newspapers, but in real ways that could get the administration to back off. We could organize a movement. A real movement. Kentei was stunned. He hadn't expected this kind of support from someone like Jackson, let alone someone who had remained so silent until now. I don't understand, Kentei said slowly. Why would you want to help me? You don't even know me. Jackson smiled, though it was a tight, almost reluctant smile. Maybe I didn't know you before, but I've seen the kind of person you are. You're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for something bigger than any of us. And I can't just stand by and watch this happen. I have to do something. Kentei took a deep breath, trying to process Jackson's words. So, what exactly are you proposing? Jackson straightened up, his posture becoming more confident. I'm proposing that we don't just wait for the administration to take us down. We take the fight to them. We start organizing, walkouts, rallies, petitions, media campaigns. If they want to make an example of you, let's make sure it's an example they can't ignore. Kentei's mind raced as he thought about the possibilities. This was exactly what he needed, a way to escalate the fight, to show the administration that they couldn't just silence him. But he also knew the risks. What Jackson was suggesting could bring even more attention to the cause, but it could also make things 100 times more dangerous for him and for everyone involved. I don't know, Kentei said, his voice uncertain. What if this backfires? What if we just make everything worse? Jackson leaned forward, his expression serious but passionate. We don't back down. That's the only thing we can't do. If we don't stand up now, then we're just letting them win. But if we stand together, if we make our voices heard, we can force change. It's not just about you, Kentei. It's about every student here who's ever been treated like they don't matter. Kentei felt a fire spark inside of him. He had always known that what he was fighting for wasn't just his own freedom. It was for everyone who had ever been pushed to the margins, silenced, or ignored. He couldn't turn back now. Not after everything that had happened, not after everything he had learned. Okay, Kentei said, his voice steadying. Let's do it. Jackson's eyes lit up with determination. Good. You won't regret this. They stood together, their shared purpose unspoken but understood. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The next week, Kentei's life became a blur of meetings, planning sessions, and late-night phone calls. Jackson had proven to be an unexpected ally, someone with connections and ideas that Kentei had never thought of. Together, they began laying the groundwork for the movement that would change everything. They reached out to students, professors, and even alumni who shared their vision, creating a network of people who were willing to stand up and speak out. But as they gained momentum, the stakes grew higher. The university began to fight back with everything it had, lawyers, PR teams, and administrators working around the clock to discredit Kentei and silence the growing movement. Kentei knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with obstacles. But now, with Jackson's help, he felt more ready than ever to face whatever came next. The fight was no longer just about one student. It was about all of them, the ones who had been pushed down, silenced, and ignored for far too long. And Kente, with his unwavering resolve, would not back down. Not now. Not ever. The days after Jackson's proposal had turned into a blur. Kente had become consumed by the movement, the constant whirlwind of organizing, planning, and coordinating. What started as a small, secret effort to rally his peers had transformed into a full-scale campaign. Flyers, social media posts, and word of mouth spread like wildfire across campus. Every day, more students were coming to their meetings, showing up for their cause, and signing petitions. For the first time in a long while, Kente felt a glimmer of hope. The movement was growing, gaining traction, and it felt unstoppable. Yet, with every victory came a new challenge. Every step forward seemed to be met with an even stronger pushback from the university. The administration was pulling out all the stops. Behind the scenes, they were working tirelessly to discredit Kente, his friends, and anyone who supported him. The legal team was relentless, throwing accusations of inciting violence and disorder, even though all Kente had done was peacefully protest and demand change. A week before the scheduled hearing, the tension was palpable. Kente couldn't walk across campus without sensing eyes on him, some filled with admiration, others with fear. But the whispers behind his back didn't faze him anymore. What bothered him was the fear creeping into his own heart, the fear that everything he was doing could be for nothing. That night, he sat in his dorm room, scrolling through his phone, checking the latest messages and updates from the team. A flood of notifications poured in, but one in particular caught his eye. It was an email from an anonymous source. Kente opened it with caution. The email was brief but ominous. "You're playing with fire. The university won't stop until they ruin you. Think long and hard about what you're about to do." The words hit Kente like a cold wave. He had gotten threats before, but this one felt different. The anonymous nature of the message, the calm certainty behind it, it struck a nerve. What if they were right? What if everything he was risking wasn't worth it? What if this battle wasn't one he could win? His phone buzzed again, breaking the silence in the room. It was a text from Sarah. "Sarah, we're in this together. Just breathe. We'll get through it. All of us." Kente closed his eyes, trying to steady his breathing. He had come so far. There was no turning back now. Still, the weight of the impending hearing, the legal battle, the mounting pressure, it was almost too much to bear. But as he sat there, lost in thought, his door swung open. Sarah entered, a determined look on her face. She had that fire in her eyes, the same fire that had sparked the rally, that had pushed him to keep going, even when he wanted to quit. "I know what you're thinking," she said, sitting down next to him. "And I'm not going to let you quit." Kente turned toward her, his voice heavy. "What if they win? What if this entire movement, all of this, it's for nothing? What if we lose everything?" Sarah's eyes softened, but her voice was firm. "We won't lose. Not like that. This isn't about winning or losing in the way they want us to think. This is about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. You're not alone in this. You've got more people on your side than you realize." Kente glanced at the message from the anonymous source again. "But what if they ruin me? What if they destroy everything I've worked for?" "Then we rebuild," Sarah said simply, her hand resting gently on his. "One step at a time. But you don't give up. Not now. Not when we're this close." Her words cut through the fear clouding his mind. She was right. He couldn't let the anonymous threats or the fear of what might happen paralyze him. This fight wasn't just his. It was for everyone who had ever been told to be silent, for every person who had ever been treated as less than, for every student whose voice had been ignored. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," Kente whispered, more to himself than to Sarah. "You're stronger than you know," Sarah said. "And you don't have to be strong all the time. That's why we're here. We've got your back. All of us." Kente exhaled slowly, trying to take in her words. He didn't have all the answers, and he didn't know how this fight would end. But one thing was certain, he couldn't give up now. The next morning, as Kentei walked to campus, a wave of unease washed over him. The atmosphere was different today. Students were whispering, pointing, some even avoiding him altogether. He knew it was because of the upcoming disciplinary hearing, but it felt more personal than that. The weight of the moment was bearing down on him, and for the first time in a long time, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. He met with Jackson and the rest of the team later that day, and their meeting was tense, but focused. They had been preparing for the big day, gathering testimonies, organizing their evidence, and ensuring they had a strong case. But as Kentei sat there, listening to the plans, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. It wasn't the work they were doing that worried him, it was the consequences. What if the university turned this around and used their own words, their own actions, against them? What if they played the media in such a way that they would become the villains in this story? Are we ready for this? Kentei asked, trying to keep the anxiety out of his voice. Jackson, who had taken charge of organizing the media campaign, nodded. We've got everything in place. The media's already on our side. We've got reporters who are waiting to cover this. They can't just sweep it under the rug anymore. But then, Trey, one of the quieter members of the group, spoke up. What if they try to twist it? What if they make Kentei look like the bad guy? Sarah, sitting beside Kentei, spoke with conviction. They will try. They'll twist the narrative however they can. But we can't let them control the story. We control the narrative. If they try to paint Kentei as a troublemaker, we'll show the world who the real troublemakers are. Kentei nodded slowly. It was all coming to a head. There would be no going back. But in that moment, he felt a new sense of resolve. He had Sarah. He had Jackson. He had his team. And most importantly, he had the truth. All right, Kentei said, standing up, his voice steady. Let's make sure they hear us. Let's make sure they can't ignore us anymore. The group nodded, and they began to finalize their plans. The rallying cry had already begun, and there was no stopping it now. This wasn't just a fight for Kentei's future, it was a fight for justice, for truth, and for every student whose voice had been silenced. Later that evening, as Kentei walked back to his dorm, he looked out over the campus. The same familiar buildings were there, but tonight, they seemed different. The weight of what was about to happen settled heavily on his shoulders, but for the first time, he felt ready. The fight ahead was uncertain, but the one thing he knew for sure was that this was no longer just his fight. It was everyone's fight. And they were ready. The day of the disciplinary hearing arrived. Kentei woke up early, the nerves in his stomach gnawing at him as he lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling. He could hear the low hum of the campus outside his window, students walking, talking, the usual sounds of a university campus. But today, it felt different. There was a weight to everything, as if the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for something monumental to happen. His phone buzzed with messages from his friends. Sarah had texted him a simple, yet powerful message, "You've got this. We're with you." His friends had shown up in ways he could never have imagined. They had supported him when no one else would, had fought alongside him when it felt like the world was against them. The rallying cry had grown louder, and now, as the university's administration prepared to make its final move, Kentei realized just how much this had become more than a fight for himself. It was for every student who had ever been ignored, marginalized, or silenced. He pulled himself out of bed and stood in front of the mirror, taking a long look at his reflection. The person staring back at him didn't look like the kid who had walked into this battle months ago. He looked different now, stronger, more determined. And while he still felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him, he no longer felt alone. After a quick breakfast, he grabbed his jacket and headed out of his dorm room, where Jackson and Sarah were waiting for him. The three of them walked to the university's administration building together, where the hearing was scheduled to take place. As they approached, Kentai's heart began to race. He could feel the tension in the air, the eyes of students and faculty members watching them. Everyone knew something big was happening, but no one knew exactly what to expect. Inside, the hearing was set to begin in a large, cold conference room, the kind of room where power dynamics felt sharper, and the walls felt like they were closing in. Kentai entered first, his posture strong, but his mind was filled with 1,000 thoughts, each one more jumbled than the last. Behind him, Jackson and Sarah sat at the table with him, offering silent support. The room was filled with faculty members, university lawyers, and administrators, all of whom had been prepared to take this moment and use it against him. The Dean of Students, Dr. Richardson, a tall man with a cold, calculating gaze, sat at the head of the table. He looked up from his papers as Kentai entered, his eyes narrowing slightly. Behind him, a group of legal professionals sat, their expressions unreadable. "Mr. Carter," Dr. Richardson began, his voice as icy as ever, "you've been accused of inciting protests that disrupted the campus, engaging in activities that put the safety of students and faculty in jeopardy, and, among other things, violating university policies. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Kentai took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. This was the moment where everything could either fall apart or fall into place. He met Dr. Richardson's gaze and spoke, his voice steady but filled with a quiet power. "Yes, I do," Kentai said, pausing for a moment to gather his thoughts. "I'm not here to argue whether or not I broke any specific rules. The truth is, I did what I did because I saw injustice happening on this campus. I saw people being treated unfairly, silenced, and ignored. And I couldn't sit by and do nothing." The room was silent as Kentai's words hung in the air. He could feel the eyes of the administrators on him, but he refused to let fear take hold. "People like me, like the students who supported me, we don't always have a voice. We don't always get to be heard. And when we speak up, when we try to make a change, we're met with resistance. You might see me as a troublemaker, someone who disrupts the status quo. But I see myself as someone who is fighting for something greater than myself. I'm fighting for justice. I'm fighting for equality. And I'm fighting for every student who feels like their voice doesn't matter." His words hung in the room, filling the space with an electric tension. He could see a few of the faculty members shift uncomfortably in their seats, but Dr. Richardson remained unmoved. The dean's expression didn't change, but Kentai could see the wheels turning in his head. "You're right about one thing, Mr. Carter," Dr. Richardson said slowly. "You've made quite an impression on this campus. But the fact remains, your actions have caused a great deal of disruption. You've encouraged students to break the rules, and now the university must deal with the fallout." Kentai's heart pounded in his chest. "You don't get it. You're more concerned with rules than with what's right. You're more concerned with your reputation than the lives of your students. My actions, my protest, was about demanding something better for everyone. If you don't want to see that, then we're just going to keep going around in circles." There was a long pause as the room absorbed his words. Dr. Richardson's face remained impassive, but Kentai could see that something had shifted. The university was not prepared for the power of Kentai's resolve. Then, just as Kentai was about to speak again, the door to the room opened, and someone entered. It was Professor Mitchell, the very professor who had challenged Kentai to teach him, the man who had doubted him but had also become a silent ally in this fight. The room froze as Professor Mitchell walked in, his expression solemn. He stood in front of the table, facing Dr. Richardson and the others, and spoke with a surprising level of authority. "I've been following this case closely," Professor Mitchell said. "And I have to say that I believe Kentai's actions were not only justified but necessary. This university prides itself on fostering open discourse, but when students speak out against injustice, they're met with punishment instead of dialogue. What kind of message are we sending to the students here?" Kentai could feel his breath catch in his throat. He hadn't expected this. Professor Mitchell, a man who had once stood on the other side of the debate, was now speaking up in his defense. The room was silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Is this how we want to operate? Professor Mitchell continued, his gaze sweeping over the room. By silencing students who are asking for change. Kentei's protest was not an act of rebellion. It was an act of courage. It was an act of leadership. And I stand by him, as should every person in this room who values the true principles of education. Kentei's heart soared, the tide of the battle shifting in his favor. For the first time, he wasn't fighting this alone. The truth was on his side, and now, it seemed, there were others willing to speak up for it, too. Dr. Richardson's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He knew the momentum had shifted. Professor Mitchell's intervention had changed everything. Later that day, as Kentei walked out of the building, his heart still pounding with adrenaline, he looked around at his friends, Sarah, Jackson, and even Trey, who had been quietly supporting him from the sidelines. We did it, Kentei said, his voice full of disbelief. We actually did it. Sarah smiled, her eyes bright. Not yet, but we're closer than we've ever been. The university can't ignore us anymore. For the first time in a long while, Kentei felt the weight on his shoulders begin to lift. The storm wasn't over, but the first crack of sunlight had broken through the clouds. The fight was far from won, but for the first time, Kentei had a glimmer of hope. And that was all he needed to keep moving forward. The days after the hearing were a blur of tension, hope, and uncertainty. Kentei felt like he was walking a tightrope, balancing between the growing momentum of his movement and the impending storm of backlash that loomed on the horizon. But something had changed after Professor Mitchell's intervention. There was a new sense of power in the air, a sense of unity and purpose that he hadn't felt before. For the first time since the hearing, Kentei found himself walking across campus with a weight lifted from his shoulders. The whispers and stares hadn't stopped entirely, but now they felt different. There was an underlying respect in the way people looked at him. The movement had grown far beyond just a protest, it had become a symbol. A symbol of resistance, of hope, of standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. Sarah, Jackson, and Trey walked beside him, their faces etched with exhaustion but also pride. They had been working tirelessly behind the scenes, coordinating protests, spreading awareness, and ensuring that the movement kept its momentum. Kentei knew that none of this would have been possible without them, and he was grateful beyond words for their unwavering support. The group made their way to the student union, where an emergency meeting was scheduled with the university's board of trustees. Kentei wasn't sure what to expect. Would they listen to him, or would they continue to defend the system that had oppressed so many? The atmosphere was heavy with anticipation as students gathered in the hall, each person waiting for the moment that would either break them or push them further into the fight. Inside the room, Kentei took his seat at the front with Sarah, Jackson, and Trey by his side. The board members were seated across from them, their expressions unreadable. Dr. Richardson, the dean of students, sat in the center, his eyes cold but strangely weary. He had been a fierce opponent, but today, Kentei sensed something different. A crack in the armor. The meeting began, and Dr. Richardson addressed the room with a formality that seemed almost rehearsed. We've called this meeting to discuss the events of the past few months and to determine the university's position moving forward. The actions of certain students have caused disruption, but we also recognize the need for dialogue and progress. Kentei leaned forward, his heart racing. This was it. The moment when everything could change. The stakes had never been higher. Dr. Richardson continued, his voice more subdued than usual. We have heard the voices of students who support Mr. Carter's cause. We have also heard from those who feel that the protests have gone too far. After careful consideration and discussions with various members of the university community, we have come to a conclusion. The room fell silent as Kentei's stomach twisted. His breath caught in his throat. What would they say? Dr. Richardson looked directly at Kentei, his eyes meeting his with an intensity that almost felt like a challenge. The university will be implementing changes to address the concerns raised by Mr. Carter and others in this movement. We will begin reviewing our policies surrounding student protests, campus inclusivity, and the resources available to marginalized students. Kentei blinked in disbelief. Was this a trick? A half-measure? He searched Dr. Richardson's face for any hint of sarcasm or disdain, but there was none. It was as though the weight of the entire situation had broken something within him. He looked defeated. We will also be establishing a committee, Dr. Richardson continued, to ensure that the university fosters an environment where students can speak freely, express dissent, and challenge authority without fear of retaliation. Mr. Carter, we acknowledge that your actions have brought these issues to light, and for that, we thank you. Kentei's mind spun. This was happening. The impossible was becoming real. The university, the institution that had done everything in its power to silence him, was finally acknowledging his fight. They were giving him and his peers a platform. They were taking a step toward change. But even as Kentei absorbed the magnitude of the moment, a part of him knew this victory was just the beginning. The fight wasn't over. This was a first step, and there would be more battles ahead. The university was taking action, but it wasn't just about changing policies, it was about changing the culture, and that would take time. Thank you, Kentei said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. This isn't just my victory. This is the victory of every student who has ever felt ignored, silenced, or unheard. It's the victory of everyone who stood with us. But it's also just the beginning. Change doesn't stop with this room. It starts here, but it has to continue. We have to keep pushing. Dr. Richardson nodded, a silent acknowledgement that Kentei was right. This victory was just a moment, a spark, but the fire needed to keep burning. As the meeting ended, Kentei stood up, his legs feeling unsteady but his heart full of a new kind of hope. Outside the student union, the crowd had gathered, waiting for news. The moment they heard what had happened, the eruption of cheers was deafening. Kentei looked around, seeing his friends, his peers, everyone who had stood by him. They had done it. They had fought for something bigger than themselves, and now they had changed the course of their future. Sarah rushed up to him, her arms wide as she pulled him into a hug. You did it, she said, her voice cracking with emotion. We did it. Kentei smiled, his eyes filled with tears he hadn't expected. He had been fighting for so long, but now, standing amidst the cheers and applause, he realized that the fight hadn't just been for him. It had been for all of them, the students, the dreamers, the ones who refused to be silenced. I couldn't have done it without you, Kentei said softly, looking at his friends and supporters. We all did this. We made our voices heard. Jackson stepped forward, clapping him on the back. We're not done yet, Kentei. This is just the beginning. But damn, it feels good to win a round. Kentei nodded, feeling the weight of the words settle in. There was still so much work to do, so much left to fight for, but for now, he allowed himself a moment to breathe, to let the reality of the victory sink in. The fight had been long. The road had been hard. But they had won. They had made a difference. And that was just the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?